Some trees remember what the forest wants forgotten. The Mogollon Rim stretches across northern Arizona like a scar, a 200-mile limestone escarpment that drops nearly 2,000 feet from the Colorado Plateau into the Sonoran Desert below. The Tonto National Forest sprawls beneath it, covering nearly 3 million acres of wilderness that ranges from saguaro-dotted lowlands to pine-thick highlands where snow falls heavy in December. It is one of the largest national forests in the United States and one of the least forgiving. The town of Payson sits at the rim's edge, elevation 5,000 feet, population hovering around 15,000. It calls itself the heart of Arizona, though longtime residents speak of the forest less romantically. The Rim Country, as locals name it, has always carried a particular weight. The Apache knew it as contested ground, a transitional zone between worlds both geographically and spiritually. Spanish missionaries in the 1700s recorded stories of travelers who entered the forest and emerged changed, or did not emerge at all. The Pleasant Valley War of the 1880s, one of the bloodiest range conflicts in American history, unfolded in these same canyons, leaving behind unmarked graves that the forest has long since reclaimed. By the 1980s, the Tonto had earned a quieter reputation. Hikers vanished there with unusual regularity, not dramatically, not in clusters, but steadily, like a slow leak. Between 1975 and 1986, 11 people were reported missing in or near the Mogollon Rim corridor. Some were found, most were not. Search and rescue teams attributed the losses to the terrain, sudden weather changes, unmarked drop-offs, the disorienting sameness of the ponderosa groves. The forest, they said, was simply too large and too indifferent. Then came Christmas Eve, 1987. Forest Ranger Dale Harwood was 43 years old and had worked the Payson district for 9 years when he set out on his holiday patrol that evening. He was not scheduled to work. Christmas Eve shifts were voluntary, but Harwood had no family in the area and preferred the quiet of the forest to the noise of his empty apartment. He drove the forest roads in his government-issued Bronco, checking trailhead gates and scanning for illegal campfires. The temperature had dropped into the low 20s. Snow dusted the higher elevations. At approximately 7:45 in the evening, Harwood pulled off Forest Road 199 near a ridge overlooking Tonto Creek. He later told investigators he had stopped because something caught his eye through the trees, a faint reflection, like glass or metal catching the last light of dusk. He assumed it was litter, perhaps a discarded bottle or a lost piece of camping gear. He retrieved his flashlight and walked into the forest. What he found was a single ponderosa pine, roughly 30 feet tall, standing alone in a small clearing. The tree was decorated. Harwood counted 17 ornaments hanging from its lower branches. Each one was carved from wood, pale, smooth, and roughly the size of a silver dollar. They were circular, with beveled edges, and each bore 2 markings, a set of initials and a 4-digit year. The carvings were precise, almost mechanical in their uniformity. The ornaments hung from thin leather cords, evenly spaced, as if placed with deliberate care. Harwood photographed the tree with his service camera, then removed the ornaments and placed them in an evidence bag. He noted in his report that the snow around the tree was undisturbed. There were no footprints, no drag marks, no sign that anyone had approached the clearing from any direction. The ornaments appeared to have been placed without anyone walking to the tree. He drove directly to the Gila County Sheriff's Office in Payson and submitted the evidence that night. The investigation that followed was handled primarily by Deputy Marcus Obregon, a 12-year veteran of the Gila County Department. Obregon was methodical, skeptical, and not prone to speculation. His first step was to cross-reference the initials and years on the ornaments with the department's missing persons files. The results were immediate and disturbing. 14 of the 17 ornaments matched individuals who had disappeared in or near Tonto National Forest between 1975 and 1986. The initials and birth years were exact. One ornament, bearing the initials E.M. and the year 1951, matched Ellen Moreau, a schoolteacher from Mesa who had vanished during a solo hike in November 1979. Another, J.R.S., in 1948, matched James Robert Spaulding, a retired firefighter from Flagstaff who disappeared in August 1982. His body was never recovered. 3 ornaments did not match any known missing persons. The initials T.K. with a birth year of 1963, A.W.B. with 1955, and R.G. with 1970. Deputy Obregon flagged these as potential future cases or unreported disappearances. He requested records from neighboring counties but received no matches. Ranger Harwood, interviewed 4 times over the following month, remained consistent in his account. He had not seen anyone in the forest that evening. He had not heard anything unusual. The only detail that changed between interviews was his emotional state. By the 4th conversation, Harwood had requested a transfer to a different district. When Obregon asked why, Harwood reportedly said, "Because whoever did this knew things they shouldn't know, and they wanted the ornaments found." The ornaments were logged into evidence on December 26, 1987, and stored in a locked cabinet at the Gila County Sheriff's Office. They were scheduled to be transferred to the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Phoenix for material analysis on January 15, 1988. They never arrived. On the morning of January 14th, Deputy Obregon opened the evidence cabinet to retrieve the ornaments for transport. The bag was missing. The cabinet showed no signs of forced entry. The evidence log had not been altered. According to every official record, the ornaments should have been there. They were not. An internal review was conducted. No culprit was identified. The case file was marked incomplete and quietly shelved. Obregon retired in 1993 and declined all interview requests until his death in 2011. His daughter, Gloria Obregon Sandoval, later told a journalist from the Arizona Republic that her father kept a handwritten list in his desk drawer, 17 sets of initials, 17 years, and that he checked the news every December to see if any new disappearances matched the 3 ornaments that had never been identified. The Forest Service conducted its own internal inquiry but released no public findings. Ranger Harwood's transfer was approved. He was reassigned to the Coconino National Forest, where he worked until his retirement in 2004. According to former colleagues, Harwood never worked a Christmas shift again. When asked about the incident at a retirement gathering, he allegedly said only, "Someone out there is keeping count. I don't know who. I don't want to know." Photographs taken by Harwood on Christmas Eve 1987 were submitted with the original evidence. Those photographs are also missing from the file. No copies are known to exist. In 2009, a hiker named Daniel Whitmore reported finding a single wooden ornament hanging from a pine tree near the same ridge where Harwood had made his discovery 22 years earlier. Whitmore photographed the ornament with his phone before removing it. The image shows a smooth circular carving bearing the initials TK and the year 1963, one of the 3 unmatched ornaments from the original set. Whitmore turned the object over to the Payson Ranger District. It was logged, photographed, and stored. Within 6 months, it too had disappeared from the evidence system. No pattern has been established. No suspect has ever been named. The 3 unidentified sets of initials, TK, AWB, and RG, remain unmatched to any known missing person in Arizona or neighboring states. But every few years, someone hiking the Mogollon Rim in late December reports seeing something strange through the trees. A single pine standing alone in a clearing decorated with small wooden circles that catch the fading light. No one has approached the tree since 2009. The reports are logged but not investigated. The forest keeps its own records. And somewhere in the snow, the count continues. Some songs have no singer, only a place that remembers the melody. Tonto Creek begins high on the Mogollon Rim and carves its way south through some of the most remote terrain in Arizona. The creek runs cold and clear through narrow canyons lined with sycamores, past rock formations that predate human memory, and into stretches of wilderness where the nearest paved road can be 20 miles distant. The Tonto National Forest surrounds it, nearly 3 million acres of backcountry that has swallowed prospectors, ranchers, and hikers for well over a century. The upper reaches of Tonto Creek, near the small community of Gisela, were once dotted with mining claims. The silver boom of the 1880s brought hundreds of men into these canyons, most of whom left with nothing. A few stayed. Their cabins still stand in places, collapsed roofs, rotted timbers, stone foundations slowly returning to the earth. The Forest Service has cataloged some of these structures, but many remain unmapped, hidden in side canyons, and forgotten by all but the most determined explorers. The cabin on the North Fork of Tonto Creek was one of these forgotten places. Built sometime in the 1890s, it had belonged to a prospector named Elias Dunmore, a Welsh immigrant who had worked claims throughout the Southwest before settling along the creek in 1896. County records indicate Dunmore filed a homestead claim and lived alone in the canyon for 6 years. On December 24, 1902, he walked into the forest and never returned. His supplies were found intact. His mule remained tied outside the cabin. No body was ever recovered. The cabin passed into Forest Service control and was officially abandoned. For 52 years, no one paid it much attention. The Novak family arrived at their campsite along Tonto Creek on December 23, 1954. Walter Novak was a 41-year-old machinist from Phoenix who had been bringing his family to the Tonto Basin for winter camping trips since 1948. His wife Dorothy and their 3 children, Robert, age 14, Patricia, age 11, and young Thomas, age 7, had made the trip an annual tradition. They set up camp in a clearing roughly a quarter-mile downstream from the old Dunmore cabin, though none of them knew the structure's history at the time. Christmas Eve passed without incident. The family ate dinner by the fire, exchanged small gifts, and retired to their canvas tent around 9 in the evening. The temperature dropped into the 20s overnight. Light snow fell. According to Walter Novak's written account, submitted to the Gila County Sheriff's Office 3 days later, the family was awakened at approximately 6:45 on Christmas morning by the sound of singing. Dorothy Novak described it as hymns, old ones, the kind you'd hear in a country church. The music seemed to come from upstream, faint but unmistakable. Walter initially assumed another camping party had arrived during the night. He dressed and walked toward the sound. What he found was the Dunmore cabin. The structure was small, perhaps 12 feet by 14, with a partially collapsed roof and a door that hung open on rusted hinges. Walter approached and looked inside. The cabin was empty. No furniture remained except a rotted wooden frame that might once have been a bed. There was no radio, no gramophone, no instrument of any kind. The singing had stopped the moment he reached the doorway, but carved into the doorframe, at eye level, were 6 words that Walter Novak would remember for the rest of his life. We stayed for the service. Dorothy Novak followed her husband to the cabin approximately 10 minutes later, leaving the children at the campsite. She confirmed the carving on the doorframe and noted that the snow around the cabin was undisturbed. There were no footprints leading to or from the structure, not even animal tracks. The only marks in the snow were Walter's own boot prints. Robert Novak, the eldest child, later gave his own account to a journalist from the Arizona Republic in 1987. He had been 14 at the time and remembered the morning clearly. "My father came back to the tent white as a sheet," he said. He didn't tell us what he'd seen right away, just said we were packing up early. It wasn't until we were in the car halfway back to Phoenix that he told my mother about the carving. She didn't say anything. None of us did. Patricia Novak Reyes, interviewed in 2003 for a local history project, recalled the singing itself. "It was beautiful," she said. "That's what I remember most. It wasn't scary, not at first. It sounded like a choir, like a real congregation. I thought we'd stumbled onto some kind of sunrise service, but there was no one there. There was never anyone there." Thomas Novak, the youngest, declined all interview requests throughout his life. He died in 2019. His daughter, speaking to a podcaster that same year, said her father had only mentioned the incident once, shortly before his death. "He said he heard the singing too," she recounted, "but he heard words the others didn't. He said it sounded like a congregation waiting for someone to arrive." The Gila County Sheriff's Office received Walter Novak's written report on December 28, 1954. Deputy Raymond Hargrove was assigned to investigate. His report, preserved in county archives, is brief and largely dismissive. Hargrove visited the cabin on January 3, 1955, and found the structure as described, abandoned, partially collapsed, with no sign of recent habitation. He photographed the carving on the doorframe, but offered no interpretation. Hargrove's report notes that the carving appeared old. The wood around the letters had weathered to the same gray tone as the rest of the frame. A forestry consultant brought in to assess the cabin estimated the carving had been made no later than 1910, possibly earlier. If accurate, this would mean the words had been carved within 8 years of Elias Dunmore's disappearance and had waited nearly half a century to be read. The Forest Service conducted its own review in the spring of 1955. A ranger named Hector Fuentes was tasked with documenting the cabin for the agency's historical records. His report, filed in April, contains a detail not mentioned in the sheriff's file. According to Fuentes, the interior walls of the cabin bore faint marks, not carvings, but impressions, as if something had been pressed into the wood repeatedly over many years. The marks formed no recognizable pattern, but Fuentes described them as consistent with the wear you'd see from people sitting in pews, the kind of scuffing you get on church furniture. There were no pews in the cabin. There had never been pews in the cabin. The building had been a single-room prospector's shelter, not a place of worship. Fuentes recommended further investigation. His recommendation was not acted upon. The cabin was classified as a historic ruin of no significant interest and removed from active monitoring. By 1960, it had been struck from Forest Service maps entirely. The singing has been reported 3 more times since 1954. In December 1971, a pair of hunters from Globe claimed to hear what they described as church music coming from a side canyon along Tonto Creek. They did not investigate. In 1989, a backpacker named Susan Lindqvist reported hearing choral voices near the same location early on Christmas morning. She searched for the source, but found nothing except an old stone foundation, and in 2008, a Forest Service volunteer conducting a winter wildlife survey noted in his log that he had heard what sounded like a hymn near the upper creek, though he attributed it to auditory fatigue and did not follow up. The cabin itself is difficult to locate today. The roof collapsed entirely sometime in the 1990s, and vegetation has reclaimed much of the site. The doorframe, if it still exists, has not been photographed since 1955. But the melody persists in local memory. Residents of the Tonto Basin, when asked, describe it the same way every time. An old carol, sung in unison, familiar but impossible to name. No one has ever identified the hymn. No recording has ever been made, and carved somewhere in the rotting wood of a forgotten canyon, 6 words remain. We stayed for the service. The congregation is still waiting. Duh. Every Christmas morning, something arrives that no one sees delivered. Theodore Roosevelt Dam stands at the confluence of Tonto Creek and the Salt River, approximately 75 miles northeast of Phoenix in the rugged heart of the Tonto National Forest. Completed in 1911, it was the largest masonry dam in the world at the time of its construction, and remains one of the most significant water management structures in the American Southwest. The dam created Roosevelt Lake, a reservoir that stretches 22 miles through narrow desert canyons, supplying water and hydroelectric power to the greater Phoenix metropolitan area. The surrounding terrain is unforgiving. The Superstition Mountains rise to the west, their jagged peaks the source of countless legends about lost gold and vanished prospectors. The Sierra Ancha Wilderness sprawls to the north. Apache Junction, the nearest town of any size, sits more than 30 miles away along a winding mountain highway. Before the road was improved in the 1980s, reaching the dam required navigating one of the most treacherous drives in Arizona, a narrow cliffside route with no guardrails and sheer drops of several hundred feet. The dam itself is a monument to early 20th century ambition. Workers quarried stone from the surrounding canyons and hauled it by mule to the construction site. At least 24 men died during the 8 years of building. Their names are recorded on a plaque near the visitor center, though some historians believe the actual toll was higher. The Apache, whose ancestral lands were flooded by the reservoir, have their own memories of the place, stories of what lies beneath the water that they do not share with outsiders. It is here on the observation deck overlooking the dam's massive stone face that the gifts appear. The first documented occurrence was on Christmas morning, 1971. A Bureau of Reclamation maintenance worker named Gerald Hoffman arrived at the dam at approximately 5:45 in the morning to perform a routine inspection. The sun had not yet risen. Hoffman parked his truck near the visitor area and walked to the observation deck to check for any overnight damage or vandalism. Sitting on the deck's concrete railing was a wrapped package. It was roughly the size of a shoebox, covered in green wrapping paper decorated with silver bells. A small tag was attached to the ribbon. Hoffman picked up the package and read the tag. Written in neat, careful handwriting were 4 words, "For the one who waited." Hoffman assumed the gift had been left by a visitor the previous day, perhaps a family member of one of the workers whose names appeared on the memorial plaque. He brought the package to the maintenance office and logged it as found property. No one claimed it. After 60 days, per standard procedure, the package was to be disposed of. But according to records, no one ever opened it. The package was simply noted as unclaimed and removed from the log. The following Christmas, a second gift appeared in the exact same location. This time it was discovered by a different worker, a seasonal employee named Dolores Quintana. She described the package as identical to the one from the previous year. Green paper, silver bells, the same handwritten tag. She photographed the gift but did not touch it, instead reporting it directly to her supervisor. The package was collected and stored. By 1975, the pattern had been established. Over the following decades, multiple employees and visitors witnessed the phenomenon. The details remained remarkably consistent. The gift always appeared before sunrise on December 25th. It was always in the same spot. the eastern corner of the observation deck, where the railing meets the stone wall. The wrapping paper was always identical, green with silver bells, a pattern that gift wrap manufacturers confirmed had been discontinued in 1968, 3 years before the first appearance. Frank Delacroix, a Bureau of Reclamation security supervisor from 1983 to 1997, kept an informal log of the incidents. In an interview conducted in 2004, he recalled, "I worked 15 Christmases at that dam. The gift was there every single time I checked. I'd arrive at 4 in the morning, walk the deck, and there it was. No footprints, no vehicle tracks, nothing, just the box." When asked if he had ever considered opening one of the packages, Delacroix shook his head. "I thought about it once," he said. "In '89, I think. I picked it up and started to pull at the ribbon, but I stopped. I can't tell you why. It just felt like it wasn't for me to open." A former park ranger named Beatrice Yazzie, who worked at the Tonto National Monument Visitor Center near the dam, offered a different perspective. "The elders talk about the lake," she said in a 2011 interview. "They say there are things beneath the water that were never meant to be covered. Camps, burial sites, places of ceremony. When the dam went up, the water took them. Some people believe what's in those packages is a kind of offering, something being returned. But returned to whom? That's the question no one wants to answer." In 1994, the Bureau of Reclamation installed security cameras at the observation deck following an unrelated vandalism incident. The cameras covered all approaches to the deck and recorded continuously from dusk until dawn. Officials quietly noted that the installation would provide an opportunity to document how the Christmas packages were being placed. On December 26, 1994, security personnel reviewed the footage from the previous night and morning. The tapes showed an empty deck from sunset on December 24th through the early hours of December 25th. At 4:17 in the morning, the image flickered briefly, less than 2 seconds of static. When the picture returned, the package was visible on the railing. No figure had approached. No vehicle had passed. The deck had been empty, and then it was not. The tapes were reviewed multiple times by Bureau staff and later by a private security consultant hired in 1996. The consultant's report, portions of which were obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2009, noted that the footage showed no evidence of tampering or splicing, and that the brief static was consistent with minor electromagnetic interference. The report offered no explanation for the appearance of the package. Between 1994 and 2012, cameras captured the same phenomenon 18 consecutive times. The pattern never varied, a brief flicker, typically lasting between 1 and 3 seconds, followed by the sudden presence of the gift. In 2003, the Bureau upgraded to digital recording equipment. The result was the same. A maintenance worker named Clarence Redfern attempted to open one of the packages in 2003. According to his supervisor, Redfern picked up the gift, studied it for several minutes, and then set it back down on the railing without removing the ribbon. When asked later why he had stopped, Redfern reportedly said, "I changed my mind." He requested a transfer to another facility the following month. His transfer was approved without comment. The packages continue to appear. As of 2023, 43 gifts have been documented and removed from the observation deck. None have been officially opened. All were logged and disposed of according to Bureau protocols, though disposal records are incomplete for several years in the 1980s and 90s. The wrapping paper has never changed. The handwriting on the tags has remained identical across 5 decades. Laboratory analysis conducted in 2015 confirmed that the paper stock predates 1970, though the exact date of manufacture could not be determined. Current Bureau employees are instructed not to discuss the phenomenon with visitors or media. A 2018 internal memo, leaked to a Phoenix journalist, states only that seasonal anomalies at the Roosevelt Dam site are considered a legacy curiosity and are not subject to active investigation. But the question remains, quiet and persistent. Who is the one who waited? Each Christmas morning, before the sun rises over the Sierra Ancha, someone, or something, places a gift on that cold stone railing. The cameras flicker. The deck is empty. And then it is not. 43 gifts, 43 years, and no one has ever seen who brings them. Perhaps the answer is inside the boxes. Perhaps it has been waiting there all along, wrapped in green paper with silver bells, addressed to someone who has not yet arrived. Dum. The children sing only when no one is close enough to see them. Four Peaks rises from the Mazatzal Mountains in central Arizona, its distinctive silhouette visible from Phoenix more than 40 miles to the southwest. The massif consists of four distinct summits, the highest reaching 7,657 feet, one of the tallest points in Maricopa County. The terrain is brutal, steep volcanic rock, dense chaparral at lower elevations, and sparse pine forests near the ridgelines. Snow falls on the upper peaks in winter, sometimes accumulating several feet between December and February. The Tonto National Forest surrounds Four Peaks on all sides. The nearest maintained trail, the Four Peaks Trail, climbs more than 3,000 feet over 6 miles before reaching the saddle between the second and third summits. Beyond that point, the route becomes a scramble over loose rock and exposed granite. Most hikers turn back before reaching the true summit. Those who continue often do so alone. The mountain has a complicated history. Mining operations in the late 19th century brought prospectors into the canyons searching for gold and silver. Most found nothing. A few disappeared. The Four Peaks Amethyst Mine, discovered in 1898, still operates seasonally and produces some of the finest purple quartz in North America. But the upper reaches of the mountain have never been developed. The Forest Service maintains no structures above 6,000 feet, and the summit area remains classified as primitive wilderness. The Yavapai and Tonto Apache have their own names for the mountain, though these are not commonly shared with outsiders. What is known is that the peaks were considered a boundary, a place where the physical world met something older and less defined. Elders have reportedly warned against climbing the mountain during certain times of year. December is one of those times. The first documented report of singing on Four Peaks dates to December 1961. A geology student from Arizona State University named Malcolm Driscoll was conducting a solo survey of the mountain's volcanic formations when he heard what he later described as the most beautiful and wrong sound I've ever heard. In his field journal, preserved in the university's archives, Driscoll wrote, approximately 4:15 in the afternoon, sun low, temperature dropping, heard children's voices, singing harmonized like a church choir, coming from above, climbed toward the sound for 20 minutes, voices grew neither louder nor softer, reached the summit ridge at 4:52, complete silence, no tracks in the snow, no sign of anyone. Driscoll reported the incident to his faculty advisor, who noted it, but took no further action. The entry was filed with his other survey materials and forgotten. In December 1974, a pair of experienced mountaineers from Scottsdale, Richard Ambrose and his climbing partner June Vasquez, attempted a winter ascent of Four Peaks via the Northeast Ridge. According to Vasquez's account, published in a 1982 issue of Arizona Highways magazine, the pair heard singing at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon on December 21st. It was faint at first, Vasquez wrote. I thought Richard had turned on a radio, but he hadn't. The sound was coming from the summit, children's voices, singing a carol I couldn't quite identify. We pushed toward it. The faster we climbed, the more it seemed to stay the same distance away. When we reached the top, there was nothing, just wind and snow and silence. Ambrose and Vasquez descended before dark. Neither returned to Four Peaks. By the 1980s, the phenomenon had entered local hiking lore, though it remained poorly documented. Rangers at the Tonto National Forest's Mesa District Office began keeping informal notes on reports from hikers, though no official file was ever created. Sandra Okonkwo, a wildlife biologist who worked in the district from 1986 to 1994, recalled the reports clearly in a 2016 interview. "We heard about it every December," she said. "Hikers would come back down and ask if there was a church group up there or a school field trip. We'd tell them no. No permits had been issued. No groups were on the mountain, but they were certain they'd heard children singing." When asked to describe the sound, witnesses offered remarkably consistent details. The singing was always described as a children's choir, young voices, pre-adolescent, harmonizing in a style reminiscent of traditional Christmas carols. The melody was familiar to most listeners, but could never be precisely identified. Some thought it sounded like "O Holy Night." Others heard something closer to "Silent Night" or "What Child Is This?" None could say for certain. A retired Forest Service ranger named Thomas Beaulieu, interviewed in 2009, offered a particularly detailed account of his own experience. "It was December 22, 1991, he said. "I was doing a routine patrol near the Four Peaks Saddle when I heard it. Clear as day. Kids singing, maybe a dozen voices, all in harmony. I called out but got no response. I climbed toward the sound for maybe half an hour. The singing never got louder, never got softer. Just stayed the same. When I reached the summit, it stopped, like someone had turned off a switch." Beaulieu paused during the interview. "The strangest part," he continued, "was that I felt like I was late, like the service had just ended and everyone had already gone home." The Forest Service has never conducted a formal investigation into the Four Peaks singing phenomenon. Internal memos from the 1990s, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, reference the reports only briefly and categorize them as recurring acoustic anomalies of unknown origin. A 1993 memo from the district ranger suggests that the phenomenon may be caused by wind patterns interacting with the volcanic rock formations near the summit, a theory that has never been tested or verified. Acoustic researchers have noted that high-altitude terrain can produce unusual sound effects under certain conditions. Temperature inversions, wind shear, and the geometry of canyon walls can create auditory illusions that seem to place sounds at impossible distances or directions. However, no study has specifically examined Four Peaks and the seasonal consistency of the reports. Always December 18th through 24th, always at twilight, has not been satisfactorily explained by atmospheric science. In 2001, a graduate student in ethnomusicology at Northern Arizona University attempted to record the phenomenon. Margaret Lindholm spent 6 consecutive evenings on the Four Peaks Trail with professional audio equipment, beginning on December 18th. Her field notes, shared with a journalist in 2014, document 5 nights of silence. On the 6th night, December 23rd, her recordings captured 17 minutes of ambient wind noise, followed by what Lindholm described as a faint harmonic pattern consistent with human voices. Spectral analysis of the recording was inconclusive. The university declined to fund further research. Local historians have searched for any record of a children's choir associated with Four Peaks, a church group, a school outing, a community event that might have occurred decades ago, and left some kind of acoustic imprint on local memory. No such record exists. The nearest church to the mountain, a small Catholic mission in Sunflower, has no history of conducting outdoor services during winter months. Yavapai oral tradition, as shared selectively with outside researchers, includes references to those who sing from high places, though elders have been reluctant to elaborate. The singing continues to be reported. Online hiking forums contain dozens of accounts from climbers who have heard children's voices on 4 peaks during the week before Christmas. The details remain consistent: twilight, harmonized singing, a melody that seems familiar but can never quite be named. Some hikers describe a feeling of being watched. Others speak of an overwhelming sadness that they cannot explain. A few report that the singing seemed to be calling to them, not by name but by something deeper, as if the choir knew they were coming and had been waiting. No one has ever seen the children. No footprints have ever been found in the snow near the summit. No explanation has ever been offered that accounts for the phenomenon's precision, its timing, its location, its unchanging character across more than 6 decades. And every December, as the sun sets behind the Mazatzal Range and the shadows lengthen across the volcanic peaks, the choir begins again. They sing for 7 nights, and then on Christmas Eve they fall silent, as if their service is finally complete. Seven stockings hung where no family had ever lived. The Salome Creek Wilderness occupies a remote corner of the Tonto National Forest, approximately 60 miles northeast of Phoenix in the Sierra Ancha mountain range. The terrain is defined by deep canyons carved into Precambrian granite, seasonal waterfalls that thunder during monsoon season and dry to trickles by December, and miles of backcountry accessible only by unmaintained trails. The wilderness area spans roughly 18,000 acres and sees fewer than 200 visitors per year. Most of those are experienced canyoneers who come for the technical challenges of the Narrows, slot canyons so tight that hikers must sometimes turn sideways to pass through. Salome Creek itself runs roughly 14 miles from its headwaters near Aztec Peak to its confluence with the Salt River near Roosevelt Lake. The upper reaches of the creek pass through box canyons with walls exceeding 300 feet. In winter, these canyons receive only a few hours of direct sunlight per day. Temperatures can drop below freezing overnight, while remaining above 50 degrees at midday, creating unpredictable conditions that have claimed multiple lives over the decades. The area has no formal search and rescue history prior to 1968, when the Forest Service began maintaining records for the Tonto Basin District. Between 1968 and 2008, 11 people were reported missing in or near the Salome Creek drainage. 6 were found alive. 2 were recovered deceased. 3 were never located. The wilderness carries a weight that longtime residents of the Tonto Basin describe carefully. The Yavapai Apache Nation considers portions of the Sierra Ancha to be spiritually significant, though specific traditions are not shared publicly. Ranchers who have worked the edges of the wilderness for generations speak of bad draws. Certain canyons where cattle refuse to graze and dogs become agitated without apparent cause. Salome Creek contains several of these draws. On December 14, 2008, a 34-year-old backpacker named Philip Brennan set out from the Workman Creek trailhead for a planned 5-day solo trip through the Salome Creek wilderness. Brennan was an experienced hiker with more than 15 years of backcountry travel. He had completed the route twice before, most recently in April 2006. He carried appropriate gear, filed a detailed itinerary with the Forest Service, and established check-in times with his wife in Gilbert. He missed his first check-in on December 16th. Search and rescue operations began on December 17th. A team of 8 volunteers and 2 Gila County Sheriff's deputies entered the wilderness from multiple access points. Conditions were challenging. Overnight temperatures had dropped into the low 20s, and recent snowfall had obscured portions of the trail. The team focused their efforts on a narrow box canyon approximately 7 miles from the trailhead where Brennan had planned to camp on his second night. On the morning of December 19th, searcher Denise Maldonado discovered the stockings. They hung from a large juniper tree growing from a crack in the canyon wall, approximately 15 feet above the creek bed. There were 7 of them, hand-knitted, each a different color, arranged in a neat row along a low-hanging branch. Maldonado initially assumed they were trail markers left by a previous hiking group, but as she approached, she realized each stocking contained an object. The team photographed the scene before removing the stockings. Inside, they found 7 items: a brass house key, a woman's wedding ring, a child's baby tooth, a military dog tag, a silver locket with no photograph inside, a folded topographic map of the Tonto National Forest, and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. The note contained 6 words: "We found our way home." The search for Philip Brennan continued for 11 more days. His body was never recovered. No trace of his equipment was found beyond a single trekking pole discovered wedged between rocks approximately 2 miles upstream from the stocking site. The case was officially suspended on January 2, 2009, and remains open, but the investigation into the stockings had only begun. Gila County Detective Oscar Fuentes was assigned to analyze the recovered items. His report, completed in March 2009, contains findings that have never been publicly explained. The brass key was traced through a locksmith's registry to a home in Mesa, Arizona, belonging to a woman named Eleanor Vance. Vance had disappeared during a hiking trip in the Sierra Ancha in November 1974. Her body was never found. The wedding ring bore an inscription on the inner band: RM to SM, June 1962. Records identified it as belonging to Sandra Mooney, a school teacher from Tempe, who vanished while birdwatching near Salome Creek in March 1981. Her case remains unsolved. The dog tag belonged to Sergeant First Class Raymond Ochoa, United States Army, who went missing during a solo camping trip in the Tonto National Forest in August 1988. Search efforts at the time found no trace of him. The tag had been reported as part of his personal effects. The child's tooth could not be definitively linked to any individual, though Detective Fuentes noted in his report that a 6-year-old boy named Timothy Gallagher had disappeared with his family near the Workman Creek area in December 1991. The family's vehicle was found abandoned. No bodies were ever recovered. The tooth's size and condition were consistent with a child of approximately that age. The silver locket matched a description given by the family of Christine Delacroix, a French exchange student who vanished while hiking alone near Roosevelt Lake in October 2006. Her parents had reported that she always wore a locket given to her by her grandmother, a locket that was never found with her other belongings. The folded map bore handwritten annotations in the margins, though the handwriting matched no known sample in any of the case files. Detective Fuentes' report raised more questions than it answered. 6 of the 7 items corresponded to missing persons cases spanning 34 years. The cases had no apparent connection, different demographics, different seasons, different circumstances. The only common thread was geography. All 6 individuals had disappeared somewhere within the greater Tonto National Forest, though not all within the Salome Creek drainage specifically. The 7th item, the handwritten note, could not be attributed to anyone. Handwriting analysis conducted by the Arizona Department of Public Safety concluded that the script did not match any known sample from the linked cases or from Philip Brennan himself. The paper was estimated to be between 20 and 40 years old, though precise dating was not possible. The stockings themselves offered few clues. Laboratory analysis determined they were hand-knitted from wool yarn, likely produced domestically, with dye patterns consistent with materials available in the 1960s and 70s. None of the stockings matched any known commercial pattern. They appeared to have been made individually, by hand, over an extended period. The Forest Service conducted its own review of the site in January 2009. Rangers noted that the juniper tree was located in a section of the canyon that did not appear on any official trail map. The area was classified as unmaintained and had no record of permitted camping or recreational use. When investigators returned to the site in March 2009 to conduct additional surveys, the tree was still standing. The branch from which the stockings had hung was bare. Rangers reported finding no evidence that anyone had visited the location since December. No explanation was offered for how the items had been collected, preserved, and placed in the stockings. No footprints had been found near the tree during the initial search. No vehicles had been reported in the area during the relevant time frame. The case file was marked inactive in June 2009. Philip Brennan's wife, Angela, continued to search for answers for nearly a decade. In a 2017 interview with a Phoenix television station, she described visiting the canyon where the stockings were found. "I don't know what I expected to feel," she said. "Closure, maybe. But standing there looking at that tree, I just felt like I was interrupting something, like I wasn't supposed to be there." The 6 individuals whose belongings were found in the stockings remain officially missing. Their cases have never been closed. The families have never received answers. And the 7th item, the note with its 6 careful words, continues to wait for someone to claim it. "We found our way home." No one knows who wrote it. No one knows whose home it refers to, but somewhere in the narrow canyons of Salome Creek, beneath a juniper tree that grows from cracked stone, 7 people may have finally arrived. The wilderness keeps its own records, and sometimes it leaves them hanging where the living can find them. The table was set for guests who had already finished eating. Pine Creek flows through the central Tonto National Forest, descending from the Mogollon Rim through a series of narrow canyons before joining the East Verde River near the small community of Pine. The creek runs cold year-round, fed by snowmelt and springs that emerge from the limestone formations along the rim. In winter, ice forms along the banks and temperatures regularly drop into the single digits overnight. The surrounding forest is dense with ponderosa pine, Gamble oak, and Douglas fir, terrain that has changed little since the first European settlers arrived in the 1870s. The area around Pine Creek has a sparse population even today. The town of Pine, elevation 5,400 feet, has fewer than 2,000 permanent residents. Neighboring Strawberry, 3 miles to the north, has even fewer. Between the two communities and the wilderness beyond, there are stretches of forest where a person could walk for days without encountering another soul. Hunting camps have dotted these woods for over a century. During deer season, which runs through late December in Arizona, small groups of hunters establish temporary camps along the creek and its tributaries. Most pack in by truck or ATV, set up canvas tents, and spend a week glassing the ridgelines for mule deer and elk. The camps are usually modest: folding chairs, coolers, propane stoves, nothing elaborate. What Vernon Krieger and his nephew Martin discovered on Christmas morning 1992 was something else entirely. Vernon Krieger was 58 years old and had been hunting the Pine Creek drainage since 1967. His nephew Martin Ibarra, then 24, had accompanied him on hunts since the age of 12. The two had established a small camp approximately 4 miles northeast of Pine, accessible by a Forest Service road that becomes impassable after significant snowfall. On the morning of December 25th, the men set out from camp at approximately 6:30 to scout a ridge they had identified the previous day. Light snow had fallen overnight, and temperatures hovered around 18 degrees. According to statements both men later gave to the Gila County Sheriff's Office, they had walked roughly 2 miles through the forest when they entered a clearing they did not recognize. In the center of the clearing stood a wooden dining table. The table was rectangular, approximately 8 feet long, and appeared to be made of solid oak. It was covered with a white tablecloth, pressed and clean despite the surrounding snow. 6 place settings were arranged around the table: fine china plates with a blue floral pattern, polished silverware, cloth napkins folded into triangles, and crystal water glasses filled with what appeared to be water. At the center of the table sat a large serving platter containing a fully carved turkey, surrounded by dishes of what Vernon later described as mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans, and some kind of cranberry sauce. 6 wooden chairs surrounded the table. All 6 were pushed in, as if the diners had finished their meal and departed. Steam rose faintly from the turkey. Martin Ibarra photographed the scene with a disposable camera he had brought to document the hunting trip. Vernon approached the table and touched the serving platter. He later stated that it was warm, like it had just come out of the oven. The 2 men searched the clearing and surrounding forest for approximately 20 minutes. They found no footprints in the snow other than their own. No vehicle tracks, no tent, no campfire, no sign that anyone had been present. The nearest road was more than a mile away. The nearest occupied structure was their own camp, 2 miles to the southwest. They marked the location on Vernon's topographic map and returned to camp to radio the Forest Service. Ranger Patricia Swenson responded to the report at approximately 11:15 that morning. She was accompanied by Deputy Franklin Rojas of the Gila County Sheriff's Office and a second ranger named Arthur Gustafson. The 3 officials followed Vernon and Martin back to the clearing, arriving shortly after noon. The table was still there. The tablecloth remained white and clean, but the food was gone. The plates, silverware, glasses, and napkins had vanished. Only the bare table and 6 wooden chairs remained, arranged exactly as they had been that morning. "I didn't know what to make of it," Ranger Swenson recalled in a 2004 interview with a regional magazine. The hunters were clearly shaken. They kept pointing at the table, saying there had been a full Christmas dinner sitting there 4 hours earlier. But when we arrived, it was just empty furniture in the middle of the woods. Deputy Rojas photographed the scene and took statements from both hunters. He noted in his report that the table showed no signs of weathering and appeared to be of antique construction, possibly early 20th century. The chairs matched the table in style and condition. Neither bore any manufacturer's marks or identifying features. Arthur Gustafson walked the perimeter of the clearing and found no tracks entering or leaving the area. "The snow was undisturbed," he stated in his report. "Whatever had been on that table, whoever had put it there, they didn't leave any trace I could find." The officials remained at the site until approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, at which point fading daylight and dropping temperatures forced them to withdraw. Deputy Rojas recommended that the table and chairs be removed for analysis. A retrieval team was scheduled for the following morning. When the team arrived on December 26th, the clearing was empty. The table and chairs were gone. The snow where they had stood was smooth and unmarked, as if nothing had ever been there. The photographs taken by Martin Ibarra were developed at a pharmacy in Payson on December 28, 1992. Of the 24 exposures on the roll, 7 captured the scene in the clearing. 4 showed the table with its full place settings and the carved turkey at center. 3 showed the empty table as it appeared when officials arrived. The anomaly was not noticed until Martin picked up the prints. In 2 of the 4 photographs showing the dinner spread, the chairs appeared to be occupied. The figures were indistinct, blurred, as if captured in motion, though Martin had used a standard shutter speed and reported no movement at the time. The shapes were vaguely human in proportion, seated upright facing the table. Their features were not discernible. In the other two photographs from the same series, the chairs appeared empty. Martin brought the photographs to the sheriff's office on December 30th. Deputy Rojas submitted them to the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory for analysis. The laboratory report, completed in February 1993, concluded that the photographs showed no evidence of double exposure, tampering, or film defects. The report noted that the blurred figures were consistent with motion blur or an optical anomaly, but offered no explanation for their presence in some frames and absence in others. The negatives were retained by the crime laboratory. Subsequent requests by researchers and journalists to examine them have been declined, with the department citing the ongoing inactive status of the case. Local historians attempted to identify the table and chairs based on the photographs. An antiques dealer in Globe suggested the furniture was consistent with pieces produced in the Arizona Territory between 1900 and 1910, possibly from a homestead or mining operation in the region. No matching furniture was found in any catalog or estate sale record from the area. Vernon Krieger returned to hunt the Pine Creek drainage every year until his death in 2011. He reportedly avoided the area where he had found the table, though he never explained why to his nephew. Martin Ibarra stopped hunting entirely after 1992. In a 2016 interview, he described the experience in measured terms. "I've thought about it for over 20 years. I don't have an explanation. I know what I saw, I know what the photographs showed, and I know that when I look at those pictures, at those shapes in the chairs, I feel like I interrupted something, like we walked in on a private gathering and they waited for us to leave before they finished." The clearing has been revisited by hikers and researchers multiple times since 1992. No trace of the table, chairs, or any related objects has ever been found. The forest. Service has no record of permitted events or structures in that section of the Pine Creek drainage, but every few years, someone reports finding something in the woods near Pine, a single china plate with a blue floral pattern half buried in pine needles, or a crystal glass standing upright on a fallen log, filled with frozen water. The table was set for 6. The photographs showed 6 figures, and somewhere in the forest, a meal was completed that Christmas morning by guests who left no footprints and took everything with them except the memory of having been there. The bells ring from a church that was never built. Apache Lake lies in a narrow canyon along the Salt River, approximately 65 miles northeast of Phoenix. The lake stretches 17 miles through rugged desert terrain, its waters held back by Horse Mesa Dam, which was completed in 1927 as part of the Salt River Project's efforts to control flooding and provide hydroelectric power to the growing Phoenix metropolitan area. The canyon walls rise more than 1,500 feet on either side, creating a corridor of deep blue water surrounded by volcanic rock, saguaro cactus, and the occasional ironwood tree clinging to impossible slopes. The lake is remote by Arizona standards. A single paved road, the Apache Trail, provides access from the west, though the route is often closed due to rock slides or flood damage. The eastern approach requires a high-clearance vehicle and several hours of driving on unmaintained forest roads. Most visitors arrive by boat launching from the small marina near the dam and motoring into the wilderness beyond. Before the dam, the canyon was home to scattered ranching operations and mining claims. The Salt River flowed freely through the gorge, swelling during monsoon season and shrinking to a trickle by May. The Yavapai and Tonto Apache had traveled these canyons for centuries before European contact, following game and harvesting plants along the river corridor. Spanish missionaries passed through in the 1700s, though they established no permanent presence. When Horse Mesa Dam was completed, the rising waters flooded approximately 3,000 acres of canyon floor. Ranches, mining camps, and ancient pathways disappeared beneath the surface. The Salt River Project conducted surveys before the flooding, documenting structures and relocating what could be moved. But some things were left behind. And some things, according to those who fish these waters at night, never stopped keeping their own time. The first documented report of bells beneath Apache Lake predates the lake itself. In December 1927, 3 months before Horse Mesa Dam was completed and the canyon began to flood, a surveyor named Howard Jessup was camped near the river conducting final measurements for the Salt River Project. According to his field journal, preserved in the Arizona Historical Society archives, Jessup was awakened on the night of December 24th by the unmistakable sound of church bells ringing somewhere in the canyon. Jessup noted the time, 11:47 in the evening. He counted the tolls. There were 13. He searched the surrounding area the following morning and found nothing, no church, no bell tower, no structure of any kind that could have produced the sound. His journal entry concludes, "I am certain of what I heard. I am equally certain there is no explanation for it." The canyon flooded over the following months. Apache Lake filled to capacity by late 1928. And for 3 decades, no further reports of bells were recorded. Then, on Christmas Eve, 1958, a fisherman named Roberto Ibarra reported hearing bells while anchored near the deepest section of the lake, approximately 8 miles from the dam. Ibarra was night fishing for catfish with his brother-in-law, Gilberto Salinas. Both men heard the sound, deep, resonant, rising from somewhere beneath the boat. Ibarra later told a reporter from the Mesa Tribune that the bells sounded like they were coming from the bottom of the lake, like there was a church down there calling people to midnight mass. The bells tolled 13 times. They began at 11:47. They stopped precisely at midnight. Over the following decades, reports accumulated with remarkable consistency. Fishermen, campers, and boaters on Apache Lake described hearing bells on Christmas Eve, always from the water, always beginning at 11:47, always tolling exactly 13 times. Leonard Kowalczyk, a retired electrician from Mesa, who fished Apache Lake regularly between 1972 and 1998, heard the bells on 3 separate occasions. "The first time, I thought I was losing my mind," he said in a 1995 interview with a Phoenix radio station. "The second time, I brought a tape recorder. Didn't pick up anything, just water noise and my own breathing. But I heard them clear as day. 13 bells, right on schedule." A former Apache Junction schoolteacher named Virginia Hoffman encountered the phenomenon in December 1983 while kayaking alone on the lake. "I had paddled out to watch the stars," she recalled, in a 2009 oral history project. "Just before midnight, I started hearing this deep, slow tolling. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I counted along without even thinking about it. When I got to 13, it stopped. And then there was this silence, the most complete silence I've ever experienced, like the whole canyon was holding its breath." Local fishing guides have developed their own protocols around the phenomenon. Marcus Redhorse, a Tonto Apache guide who has worked the lake since 1989, described his approach in a 2012 interview. "I don't take clients out on Christmas Eve. Some of the older folks say it's disrespectful to be on the water when the bells ring. I don't know about that. I just know that something happens out there that I can't explain, and I'd rather not have to try." When asked about the origins of the bells, Redhorse was measured. "The elders talk about things beneath the water that were never meant to be covered. They don't call them bells. They have older words for it, but they've known about the sound for longer than any of us have been alive." The Salt River Project has no official position on the Apache Lake Bell phenomenon. Internal correspondence from 1987, obtained through a public records request, references recurring acoustic anomalies reported by recreational users, and recommends no further investigation at this time. Hydrologists have proposed several explanations for underwater sounds in reservoir environments. Temperature differentials between surface and bottom waters can create pressure changes that produce audible effects. Seismic activity along fault lines, and the Phoenix Basin sits atop several, can generate low-frequency vibrations that travel efficiently through water. Underwater rock formations may amplify ambient sounds in unexpected ways. None of these theories accounts for the precision of the Apache Lake phenomenon, the specific timing, the consistent number of tolls, the exclusive occurrence on Christmas Eve. In 1994, a team of researchers from Arizona State University conducted an acoustic survey of the lake in an attempt to identify the source of the reported sounds. They deployed hydrophones at multiple depths and recorded continuously for 72 hours, spanning December 23rd through the 25th. The recordings captured normal underwater ambient noise, fish, boats, water movement against rock. No bells were detected. However, research assistant Naomi Johansson, who monitored the equipment from a boat anchored near the survey site, reported hearing bells at 11:47 on Christmas Eve. She counted 13 tolls. The hydrophones, positioned less than 50 feet from her location, recorded nothing unusual during that interval. Johansson's observation was noted in the team's final report, but not included in their published findings. The study was never repeated. Historical research has failed to identify any church or bell tower in the canyon prior to flooding. Spanish mission records contain no reference to a chapel or religious structure in the immediate area. Survey documents from the Salt River Project, completed between 1923 and 1927, catalog dozens of buildings in the flood zone: houses, barns, mining shacks, storage facilities, but no churches. Yet the bells continue to ring. Apache Lake remains a popular destination for fishermen and boaters, though the marina sees notably fewer reservations in late December than at other times of year. Longtime visitors know the stories. Some come specifically on Christmas Eve, hoping to hear the bells for themselves. Most leave disappointed. The phenomenon, whatever its source, does not perform on demand, but every few years, someone anchors in the deep water near the canyon center and waits through the cold December night. And just before midnight, they hear it. A single bell, low and resonant, tolling from somewhere far below. Then another. 13 times, always 13, and then silence so complete it seems to swallow the stars themselves. Howard Jessup heard the bells in 1927 before the lake existed. Fishermen hear them still, rising through 200 feet of water from a floor that was once dry land. Whatever rings beneath Apache Lake has been keeping time for nearly a century. It was there before the water came. It will likely be there long after the dam crumbles and the canyon drains, and the bells finally have no one left to hear them, except perhaps those who were always meant to answer. The tracks climbed toward the sky and then simply ended. Mazatzal Peak rises to 7,903 feet in the heart of the Mazatzal Wilderness, one of the most rugged and least visited designated wilderness areas in Arizona. The peak anchors the southern end of the Mazatzal Mountains, a range that runs roughly 40 miles from the Verde River Valley to the Mogollon Rim. The terrain is notoriously difficult: steep ridge lines, dense chaparral at lower elevations, and rocky outcroppings that make cross-country travel dangerous even for experienced hikers. The wilderness encompasses 252,000 acres of protected land within the Tonto National Forest. There are no roads, no permanent structures, and no maintained facilities beyond a handful of primitive trails. Winter brings snow to the higher elevations, sometimes several feet between December and February. The nearest community, the small town of Payson, lies more than 20 miles to the northeast. Wildlife in the Mazatzal Range is typical of Arizona's transition zone: mule deer, elk, javelina, black bear, and mountain lion. The Forest Service conducts periodic surveys to monitor population health and migration patterns. In the late 1970s, these surveys were performed by a small team of biologists based out of the Payson Ranger District, working on foot through some of the most isolated terrain in the state. In December 1979, one of those biologists encountered something that would trouble him for the rest of his career. Dr. Eugene Halverson was 36 years old and had worked for the Forest Service for 11 years when he set out on December 19, 1979, for a routine winter wildlife survey on Mazatzal Peak. His assignment was to document animal tracks, scat, and other signs of activity along the ridgeline between the peak and nearby Cactus Ridge. He carried standard equipment, a camera, field notebook, plaster casting supplies, and enough provisions for 3 days. On the morning of December 21st, Halverson was traversing a snowfield approximately 500 feet below the summit when he noticed an unusual set of tracks crossing his path. The prints were cloven, similar in shape to deer or elk, but the size and spacing were wrong. Each print measured approximately 4 inches in diameter, larger than a typical mule deer, but smaller than an elk. The stride length suggested an animal moving at a walk, yet the depth of the impressions indicated significant weight, perhaps 300 pounds or more. Halverson followed the tracks across the snowfield to a solitary ponderosa pine, standing near a rocky outcropping. There, the tracks formed a perfect circle around the tree, not a wandering pattern, but a precise geometric loop, as if the animal had deliberately walked the circumference before continuing. From the pine, the tracks led upward toward Torre, the summit. Halverson noted in his field journal that the angle of ascent increased progressively from roughly 15 degrees to what he estimated as 45 degrees near the ridgeline. The spacing between prints remained consistent, suggesting the animal had maintained its walking pace even as the slope steepened to a grade that would challenge a mountain goat. The tracks ended at a cliff edge overlooking a 500-foot drop to the canyon below. Halverson searched the area for 2 hours. He found no sign of descent, no disturbed snow, no scrape marks on the rock, no tracks leading back down the slope. He photographed the final prints and noted their position relative to the cliff edge. The front hooves of the last impression were less than 6 inches from empty air. In his journal, Halverson wrote, "Animal appears to have walked to the cliff edge and stopped. No evidence of fall, jump, or retreat. Tracks simply end, as if the animal ascended at an increasingly steep angle and continued climbing into nothing." Halverson submitted his survey report to the Payson Ranger District on December 23, 1979. The unusual tracks were documented in an appendix, accompanied by photographs and plaster casts of 3 representative prints. His supervisor, District Wildlife Manager Donald Brinkerhoff, reviewed the materials and forwarded them to the Arizona Game and Fish Department for analysis. The response, received in February 1980, was inconclusive. A senior biologist named Margaret Kowalski examined the casts and photographs and reported that the prints do not correspond to any ungulate species native to Arizona or the broader southwest region. She noted similarities to caribou or reindeer tracks, but emphasized that no such animals existed within 2,000 miles of the Mazatzal wilderness. The size, shape, and dewclaw positioning are consistent with Rangifer tarandus, Kowalski wrote in her analysis. However, the presence of reindeer in central Arizona is biologically implausible. I recommend the casts be retained for future reference, but offer no explanation for their origin. Brinkerhoff interviewed Halverson twice in January 1980. According to notes from those conversations, preserved in district archives, Halverson remained firm in his account, but increasingly reluctant to discuss the incident. He seemed embarrassed, Brinkerhoff noted, like he knew how it sounded and wished he had never reported it. When asked about the circular path around the Ponderosa Pine, Halverson reportedly said, "Animals don't walk in perfect circles. That's not behavior. That's something else." A local rancher named Curtis Featherstone, whose family had worked cattle in the Mazatzal foothills for 3 generations, offered his own perspective when interviewed by a Payson newspaper in 1982. "My grandfather used to talk about tracks in the high, country that didn't belong to anything he knew," Featherstone said. He called them visitor tracks. Said they showed up every few years, always in winter, always above the snow line. He never saw what made them. Neither did anyone else. The Forest Service conducted no formal investigation into Halverson's report. The casts and photographs were filed with his survey materials and remained in district storage until 1993, when a records consolidation transferred them to the Tonto National Forest headquarters in Phoenix. Attempts by researchers to locate the materials in 2008 were unsuccessful. The files are listed in the catalog but cannot be found. Halverson continued working for the Forest Service until his retirement in 2004. He declined all interview requests regarding the Mazatzal tracks, though colleagues reported that he never conducted another winter survey on the peak. A former co-worker named Russell B. Gay, interviewed in 2015, recalled asking Halverson about the incident shortly before his retirement. "He got quiet for a long time," Begay said. "Then he told me that whatever made those tracks wasn't walking away from something. It was walking toward something, and when it got to where it was going, it didn't need to walk anymore." Halverson died in 2017. His personal papers, donated to Northern Arizona University, contain no reference to the December 1979 survey. The phenomenon has not been reported since, or if it has, no one has filed an official account. But hunters and hikers in the Mazatzal wilderness occasionally mention finding unusual tracks in the snow during late December. Cloven prints too large for deer, too small for elk, forming patterns that seem deliberate rather than random. A backpacker named Teresa Moreau, writing in an online hiking forum in 2019, described finding a set of tracks on Mazatzal Peak that circled a tree 3 times and then headed straight up a slope so steep I couldn't follow without ropes. She posted no photographs. Other forum members dismissed her account as a misidentification or a joke. Tamum. The tracks Eugene Halverson documented in 1979 remain unexplained. No reindeer have ever been recorded in Arizona. No escaped livestock matching the description have ever been reported missing. The perfect circle around the Ponderosa Pine, the ascending angle of the trail, the abrupt termination at the cliff edge, none of it fits any known animal behavior. Every December, snow falls on Mazatzal Peak. It covers the rocky outcroppings and the scattered pines, the cliffs and the ridgelines, and the places where no trails lead. And somewhere on that mountain, something may still be walking, up slopes too steep for any earthbound creature, toward a destination no one else can see. The tracks always end at the edge. But perhaps that is not where the journey stops. Perhaps that is simply where we lose sight of it. The cards know things that were never written down. Pumpkin Center is not a town in any official sense. It is an unincorporated community in Gila County, Arizona, scattered along State Route 188, where the highway curves through the Tonto Basin between Payson and Roosevelt Lake. The population has never exceeded 300. There is no mayor, no city council, No municipal infrastructure beyond a small post office, a volunteer fire station, and a general store that has changed hands 11 times since 1952. The community takes its name from a pumpkin patch that once grew near the original homestead, established in the 1880s by ranchers seeking grazing land in the basin. The spelling, punkin rather than pumpkin, has been a source of minor local pride for over a century. Residents say it distinguishes them from everywhere else, though most outsiders have never heard of the place at all. The Tonto Basin surrounding Pumpkin Center is high desert transitioning to pine forest, with elevations ranging from 2,000 to 4,000 feet. Summers are brutally hot. Winters are mild by mountain standards, but cold enough for frost. The Salt River, before it was dammed to create Roosevelt Lake, once flowed through the basin carrying snowmelt from the Mogollon Rim. Now the lake dominates the landscape, its waters visible from the higher points around the community. The people who live in Pumpkin Center are ranchers, retirees, and those who prefer solitude to society. Many families have been there for generations. They know each other's histories, each other's losses, each other's secrets, or they thought they did until the cards started arriving. The first documented Christmas card appeared in December 1963. It was received by Mabel Strickland, a 67-year-old widow who had lived in Pumpkin Center since 1924. The card was standard holiday stock, a snowy farmhouse scene, mass-produced, unremarkable. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. She forgave you for the roses before she closed her eyes. Mabel Strickland had never told anyone about the roses. In August 1941, her mother had died at the family ranch after a long illness. In her final days, the elderly woman had asked Mabel to bring roses from the garden, her favorite flowers, yellow climbers that grew along the fence. Mabel, exhausted from weeks of caregiving, had forgotten. Her mother died the following morning. Mabel had carried the guilt privately for over 20 years, never speaking of it to her husband, her children, or anyone else. The card was unsigned. The postmark read Pumpkin Center, AZ. The post office, which Mabel visited 3 times a week to collect her mail, had no record of the card being processed. She told no one about the message. She burned the card in her wood stove that evening. The following December, her neighbor Harold Sweeney received a card of his own. Harold Sweeney was a Korean War veteran who had moved to Pumpkin Center in 1958 to escape what he called the noise of the world. He lived alone in a small cabin near Tonto Creek and rarely spoke about his time in the service. The card he received on December 22, 1964, contained 7 words. The boy at Chosin still prays for you. Sweeney had been present at the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in November and December 1950. During the brutal retreat, his unit had encountered a young Korean boy, a refugee perhaps 8 or 9 years old, hiding in a destroyed farmhouse. Sweeney had given the child his last ration bar and his spare gloves before the unit moved on. He never knew what happened to the boy. He had never told anyone about the encounter, considering it too small a kindness to mention amid so much death. The card was unsigned. The postmark was Pumpkin Center. The post office had no record of it. Sweeney kept the card in his Bible until his death in 1987. His niece, sorting through his belongings, found it pressed between the pages of Psalms. By the 1970s, the cards had become an open secret in Pumpkin Center, not discussed in detail, but acknowledged in the way small communities acknowledge things they cannot explain. Most recipients refused to share the contents of their messages. Those who did spoke carefully, in fragments. Delphine Yazzie, a Tonto Apache woman who had married into a Pumpkin Center ranching family, received a card in 1976. She described the message to her daughter decades later. It mentioned the song my grandmother sang when she was dying, a healing song. I was the only one in the room when she sang it. I was 6 years old. A retired school teacher named Bernard Oliphant received a card in 1981 that referenced the letter you wrote but never sent. Oliphant, according to his grandson, had composed a letter to his estranged brother in 1969, apologizing for a falling out that had kept them apart for 15 years. He had sealed the letter, addressed it, and placed it in his desk drawer, intending to mail it the following day. He never did. His brother died in 1970. The letter remained in the drawer, unopened and unsent. The card knew about it anyway. Postmaster Francis Underwood, who operated the Pumpkin Center Post Office from 1973 to 1998, was interviewed by a regional journalist in 1995. She confirmed that she had received multiple inquiries over the years about the Christmas cards, but had never found any evidence of their passage through her facility. "The postmarks are real," Underwood said. "I've examined them myself. They're from this office. The cancellation stamp, the date, everything matches. But I have no record of ever processing them. No one does. It's as if they appear in the mailboxes without ever going through the mail." In 1988, Gila County Sheriff's Detective Raymond Fonseca conducted an informal investigation at the request of several Pumpkin Center residents who had grown concerned about the cards. Fonseca collected 11 cards from families willing to share them and submitted them to the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory for analysis. The laboratory report, completed in March 1989, contained several notable findings. First, the paper stock used for all 11 cards was identical, a coated cardboard consistent with holiday card production methods from the late 1950s or early 1960s. Chemical analysis suggested the paper had been manufactured between 1957 and 1962, regardless of when the cards had been received. Second, the ink used for the handwritten messages was also consistent across all samples. A standard fountain pen ink, carbon-based, of a type widely available in the 1940s and 50s, but largely discontinued by 1965. Third, and most puzzling, handwriting analysis indicated that the messages had been written by at least 7 different individuals. The samples showed distinct variations in letter formation, pressure, and slant, yet no match was found to any known handwriting sample on file with Arizona law enforcement or federal databases. Detective Fonseca's report concluded that the cards represented an unexplained phenomenon of unknown origin and recommended no further action. The case file was closed. The cards continued to arrive. A woman named Rosalind Guerrero received one in 2003 that mentioned the name you almost gave her, a reference to a child she had miscarried in 1981. She had considered naming the baby after her grandmother, but had never spoken the name aloud to anyone. A teenager named Kyle Pemberton received a card in 2014, the youngest known recipient, containing a message about the promise you made at the lake. Pemberton later admitted to his parents that he had promised his dying grandfather, during a fishing trip to Roosevelt Lake, that he would take care of his grandmother. He had been 9 years old. He had told no one. The cards still arrive in Pumpkin Center every December. Not every family receives one every year. Some have received multiple cards over the decades. Others have received only one. A few longtime residents claim to have never received any, though whether this reflects the truth or simply reluctance to discuss the matter is unclear. The post office continues to process holiday mail without recording any anomalous items. The postmarks remain authentic. The paper and ink remain consistent with materials from 62 years ago, and the messages continue to know things they should not know. Private griefs, unspoken promises, moments witnessed by no one, remembered by no one, written down nowhere. Somewhere, someone, or something, is keeping track of the secrets that Pumpkin Center carries. And every Christmas, a few of those secrets are returned to their owners, wrapped in a holiday card and signed by no one. The cards offer no demands, no threats, no explanations. Just a single sentence, just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, remembers. Perhaps that is the gift. Or perhaps it is something else entirely. A reminder that in Pumpkin Center, nothing is ever truly forgotten. Not even the things we never told a soul. Duh. The fire took everything except the one tree it should have consumed first. The Sierra Ancha Wilderness occupies approximately 20,000 acres in the northeastern corner of the Tonto National Forest, a landscape of deep canyons, limestone cliffs, and mixed conifer forests that rise to over 7,000 feet. The range is ancient, Precambrian rock formations dating back more than 1 billion years, and largely inaccessible. There are no paved roads within the wilderness boundary. The few maintained trails require technical skill and careful navigation. Most of the Sierra Ancha sees fewer than 50 visitors per year. The area has a long history with fire. The Mogollon Rim, which forms the wilderness's northern boundary, creates weather patterns that generate dry lightning storms throughout the summer months. Before modern suppression efforts, fires burned through these forests regularly, clearing underbrush and maintaining the health of the ecosystem. The Apache, who traveled these mountains for centuries, understood fire as a natural and necessary force. By the late 20th century, decades of fire suppression had allowed fuel loads to accumulate to dangerous levels. When fires did ignite, they burned hotter and spread faster than historical norms. The Dude Fire of 1990 killed 6 firefighters near Payson. The Rodeo Chudisky Fire of 2002 would become the largest in Arizona history at the time, consuming nearly 500,000 acres. The Coon Creek Fire of 2000 was smaller, approximately 4,000 acres, but no less intense. It began on June 18th when a lightning strike ignited dry grass in a canyon northwest of Aztec Peak. Within 48 hours, the fire had grown beyond initial containment efforts and was threatening the Sierra Ancha Wilderness. It was during the suppression of this fire that Engine Captain Maureen Kozlowski encountered something that would challenge everything she understood about how forests burn. Kozlowski was 41 years old and had worked for the Forest Service for 18 years when she was assigned to the Coon Creek Fire as part of a Type 2 incident management team. Her engine crew was tasked with structure protection along the wilderness boundary, but on June 21st, she was reassigned to assist with direct suppression efforts in a drainage northeast of the main fire. According to her incident report, filed on June 24th, Kozlowski's crew was cutting fire line along a ridge when they observed the main fire front approaching from the southwest. Wind speeds had increased, and the fire was crowning, spreading through the upper canopy of the trees rather than along the ground. The crew retreated to a previously burned area to wait for the front to pass. From their position, Kozlowski observed a single Douglas fir standing in the fire's path. The tree was approximately 80 feet tall and appeared healthy, with dense green foliage. As the fire front reached the tree, Kozlowski expected it to ignite immediately. Douglas fir is highly flammable, and the fire was burning at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. The tree did not burn. Flames surrounded it completely. Trees on all sides ignited, torched, and collapsed. The ground around the Douglas fir was consumed, but the tree itself remained untouched. Kozlowski watched for approximately 12 minutes as the fire front passed through the area. When the flames subsided, the Douglas fir stood alone in a circle of ash and smoking debris. Its needles still green, its bark showing no sign of scorching. "I've been fighting fire for almost 2 decades," Kozlowski wrote in her report. "I have never seen anything like this. The tree should have burned. There is no reason it didn't. 4 other crew members witnessed the event and provided corroborating statements. Engine operator Vincent Sosi described the scene as impossible, like the fire just went around it. Firefighter Second Class Andrea Benitez noted that she had approached the tree after the fire passed and touched the bark with her gloved hand. It was cool, she reported. Everything around it was still burning, and the tree was cool to the touch. The crew reported the anomaly to their division supervisor, who logged it, but took no immediate action. The fire was still active, and resources were focused on containment. It was not until early July, after the Coon Creek fire was declared fully contained, that investigators returned to examine the site. Forest Service fire ecologist Dr. Nathan Lindqvist visited the location on July 8, 2000. His assessment, included in the post-fire analysis, documented a circular area of complete combustion, approximately 100 yards in diameter, with the Douglas fir standing at its center. Every other tree within the circle had burned to the ground or been reduced to a charred snag. The Douglas fir showed no fire damage whatsoever. "I examined the tree thoroughly," Lindqvist wrote. "The foliage was healthy, the bark was intact. There were no scorch marks, no heat damage, no evidence that the tree had experienced any thermal stress. I have no explanation for this." Lindqvist collected soil samples, bark samples, and needle samples for laboratory analysis. The results showed nothing unusual: standard Douglas fir tissue, standard soil composition, standard moisture content. If anything, the tree's moisture levels were lower than expected for a specimen in that location, which should have made it more susceptible to fire, not less. A local botanist named Dr. Helen Yazzie Montoya, consulted in August 2000, offered a different perspective. "In my experience, some places just don't burn," she said. "The old people have stories about trees like this, trees that fire respects. I'm not saying there's a supernatural explanation. I'm saying there are things in these mountains that science doesn't have words for yet." The Douglas fir remained standing through the summer and fall of 2000. The Forest Service flagged the site for ongoing monitoring, but conducted no further investigation. The tree was not mentioned in the final Coon Creek fire report, released in November. Then December came. On December 15, 2000, a wilderness ranger named Gabriel Orozco hiked to the site as part of a routine post-fire assessment. What he found there prompted him to radio his supervisor immediately. The tree was decorated. Hanging from its lower branches were dozens of small wooden crosses, handmade, each approximately 4 inches tall, carved from what appeared to be juniper or pinon wood. Each cross bore a single marking, a 4-digit year. Orozco counted 37 crosses in total. The earliest year was 1952. The most recent was 2000. Orozco photographed the tree and collected 3 of the crosses as evidence. He submitted them to the Payson Ranger District, where they remained in storage until an administrative assistant named Lorraine Baca cross-referenced the years with Forest Service fatality records. Every year on the crosses corresponded to a documented fire-related death in Tonto National Forest. 1952, a rancher named George Wagoner, killed while fighting a brush fire near Young. 1971, Forest Service technician Patricia Denny, struck by a falling snag during mop-up operations. 1990, the 6 Dude Fire fatalities. 2000, no deaths had occurred during the Coon Creek fire, but on September 3rd, a volunteer firefighter named Samuel Ortega had died of a heart attack while battling an unrelated fire near Globe. The crosses were dated before Ortega's death had occurred. The Forest Service conducted no formal investigation. The crosses were logged as items of unknown origin and filed with the Coon Creek fire records. The site was not monitored during subsequent winters, but visitors to the Sierra Ancha have reported seeing the tree in December, always decorated, always bearing crosses. Hikers who have photographed it describe finding new years added to the collection, years that correspond to fire deaths that occurred after their visits. The Douglas fir still stands in its circle of ash, though the surrounding forest has begun to regenerate. New growth has appeared throughout the burn scar, but nothing grows within 20 feet of the tree itself. The soil there remains bare. Each Christmas, according to those who have made the difficult journey to see it, new crosses appear. The years do not repeat. The carvings remain precise. No one has ever claimed responsibility. No footprints have been found in the winter snow around the tree. No tools, no shavings, no trace of whoever creates the crosses and hangs them in the branches. The fire that should have consumed the Douglas fir did not. And now the tree keeps its own record, a memorial to those who fell in flames maintained by hands that no one has ever seen. Perhaps it is a tribute. Perhaps it is something else. But the crosses keep appearing, and the years on them have not yet run out. Dobrze. They sang without making a sound, yet the music filled the car completely. Gisela Road winds through the Tonto Basin in central Arizona, connecting the small community of Gisela to State Route 188, near the town of Payson. The road follows the contours of Tonto Creek for much of its length, passing through high desert terrain marked by juniper, mesquite, and scattered ranches that have worked the land for over a century. In 1971, the road was unpaved for most of its 12-mile length, a rutted dirt track that became impassable during monsoon season and treacherous after winter storms. Gisela itself has never been more than a crossroads. The community was established in the 1880s as a waypoint for ranchers and miners traveling between the Tonto Basin and the Mogollon Rim. A small schoolhouse operated there until 1958. A post office served the area until 1963. By the early 1970s, Gisela consisted of perhaps 24 families scattered across the surrounding ranch land, connected by party line telephones and the single dirt road that bore the community's name. The road has always had a reputation among locals. Travelers have reported unusual experiences along its length for as long as anyone can remember. Lights in the trees that follow vehicles, sounds that seem to come from empty fields, the sense of being watched from the darkness beyond the headlight beams. Most residents dismiss these stories as the natural unease that comes from driving alone through isolated country after dark. But the events of December 23, 1971, were not so easily explained. The Whitfield family was returning to their ranch near Gisela after attending a Christmas gathering in Payson. Howard Whitfield was driving, with his wife Carolyn in the passenger seat and their two daughters, Rebecca, age 16, and Judith, age 12, in the back. The time was approximately 9:45 in the evening. The temperature had dropped into the low 30s, and a light frost was forming on the road. According to statements the family provided to the Gila County Sheriff's Office the following morning, they were approximately 2 miles south of Gisela when Carolyn noticed movement alongside the road. She initially thought it was a group of deer, but as Howard slowed the vehicle, they realized they were looking at people, a group of perhaps 8 to 10 individuals walking in a loose formation parallel to the road. The figures were dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Howard later described long coats and scarves like something from a Christmas card. They appeared to be singing, their mouths moving in unison, though no sound reached the car through the closed windows. Howard accelerated, intending to pass the group and continue home, but the carolers kept pace. At 30 miles per hour, they walked alongside the car, maintaining a distance of perhaps 15 feet from the passenger side. At 40 miles per hour, they continued without apparent effort, their legs moving in the same unhurried rhythm, their mouths still forming words. And then the music began. Carolyn Whitfield described it as silent night, clear, harmonized voices singing the familiar carol. But the sound was not coming from outside the vehicle. It was inside the car, filling the interior as if a radio had been switched on. The family's car had no radio. The singing continued for approximately 6 miles. The carolers remained visible through the passenger windows the entire time, walking at a pace that matched the vehicle exactly. When the Whitfields reached the turnoff to their ranch and Howard brought the car to a stop, the carolers stopped as well. They stood motionless at the roadside, still arranged in their loose formation, their mouths no longer moving. The music stopped at the same moment. Howard Whitfield sat frozen for several seconds. Then he turned onto the ranch road and drove away without looking back. The Whitfield family was not alone in their experience that night. 3 other families traveling Gazella Road between 9:30 and 11 o'clock reported nearly identical encounters. The Del Vecchio family, returning from a visit to relatives in Young, saw a group of carolers near the same location and reported music inside their vehicle despite having no explanation for its source. Frank Del Vecchio, a mechanic by trade, spent an hour the following day searching his car for any speaker or device that could have produced the sound. He found nothing. The Yazzie family, traveling north toward Payson, encountered the carolers approximately 1 mile south of the Whitfield sighting. Matriarch Agnes Yazzie, interviewed by a local newspaper in 1984, recalled the experience with precision. They were dressed like people from a long time ago. They smiled at us as we passed, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. The singing was beautiful, but it felt wrong, like hearing music in a place where music shouldn't be. A 4th family, a young couple named Sandoval, who had recently moved to the area, reported seeing figures alongside the road but drove past too quickly to observe details. They heard no music, but later told neighbors they had felt a heaviness inside the car that lifted only when they reached the highway. Gila County Deputy Marcus Barella responded to the Whitfield report on December 24th and drove the length of Gazella Road during daylight hours. He found no evidence of foot traffic along the roadside, no prints in the frost-hardened earth, no disturbance to the vegetation. The road showed only tire tracks from normal vehicle use. Deputy Barella interviewed all 4 families and noted the consistency of their accounts. His report, filed on December 28th, concluded, "Witnesses describe a phenomenon I cannot explain. No evidence of hoax or coordinated deception. Recommend no further action." The Gazella Road carolers have been reported intermittently since 1971, though never with the same intensity as that December night. Drivers have claimed to see figures alongside the road during the week before Christmas, always in old-fashioned clothing, always appearing to sing. The reports share common elements. The carolers keep pace with vehicles regardless of speed. They make no sound audible from outside the car, and those who hear music describe it as emanating from within their own vehicles. Local historians have searched for an explanation rooted in the area's past. The road passes near several abandoned homesteads and at least one informal cemetery dating to the territorial period. A small community of German immigrants settled briefly in the Tonto Basin in the 1890s before dispersing after a series of harsh winters. Some researchers have speculated that the carolers might represent a cultural memory of those settlers, though no documentary evidence connects them to the phenomenon. The Tonto Apache have their own interpretation. A cultural liaison named Darren Nosey, speaking to a Phoenix journalist in 2009, described the Gazella Road accounts within a broader context of what his community calls echo people, impressions left on the land by those who pass through with strong emotion or unfinished purpose. The road remembers them, Nosey explained. It plays back what they were doing at a particular moment. Whether they're aware of being seen Whether they're actually present, those are questions we don't try to answer. The Forest Service and Gila County have conducted no formal investigations. The reports are logged when received but generate no official response. A retired postal carrier named Elwood Pratt, who drove Gisela Road regularly between 1968 and 1992, offered his own account in a 2014 interview. "I saw them maybe 3 or 4 times over the years," he said, "always the same. A group walking alongside the road, mouths moving, no sound. I learned not to slow down. I learned not to look directly at them, and I never, ever rolled down my window." When asked why, Pratt was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was afraid they might hear me," he said finally, "and I didn't want them to know I was there." Gisela Road was paved in 1997. The community it serves has grown slightly, though it remains one of the most isolated settlements in the Tonto Basin. The old ranches still operate. The dirt turnoffs still lead into darkness. And every December, as Christmas approaches, someone driving that road at night reports seeing figures in the shadows. A group of carolers walking in formation, dressed in clothing from another century, their mouths forming words that produce no sound until the music starts. It comes from nowhere and everywhere. It fills the car like a memory, and it follows you down the road until you reach wherever you were going or until you stop. The carolers of Gisela Road are still singing. They have been singing for over 50 years, and perhaps they were singing long before anyone was there to hear them, walking that road in the darkness, waiting for headlights to appear so they could finally share their song. The music is beautiful. Everyone agrees on that. They just can't agree on who or what is making it. The lot closed 67 years ago, but someone is still cutting trees. Young is one of the most isolated communities in Arizona. Located in the Pleasant Valley at the base of the Mogollon Rim, the town sits at an elevation of 5,100 feet, surrounded by the Tonto National Forest on all sides. The nearest traffic light is in Payson, 50 miles to the northwest, along a winding mountain road that becomes impassable several times each winter. The population has hovered around 700 for decades, a mix of ranching families, retirees, and those who came seeking distance from the wider world. Pleasant Valley earned its name ironically. In the 1880s, the valley was the site of one of the bloodiest range wars in American frontier history, the Graham-Tewksbury feud, which left at least 19 people dead and scarred the community for generations. The violence ended not through resolution, but through exhaustion, as the surviving participants died off or fled. The ghosts of that conflict still linger in local memory. Residents speak carefully about certain family names, certain pieces of land, certain events that happened long ago but remain somehow present. The town has always existed at the edge of things, geographically, economically, temporally. Modern conveniences arrived late to young. Electricity didn't reach most homes until the 1950s. Paved roads came later still. Even now, cell phone service is unreliable, internet access is limited, and the rhythms of daily life follow patterns that would be recognizable to residents from half a century ago. The Hartley Tree Lot operated on the eastern edge of town from 1946 until 1958. For 12 years, it was where families from Young and the surrounding ranches came to buy their Christmas trees. Then Emmett Hartley disappeared, and the lot never opened again. Emmett Hartley was 43 years old when he established his tree lot on a 2-acre parcel he had purchased from a retiring rancher. He was not a native of Young. He had arrived in 1942 from somewhere in New Mexico, though records of his earlier life are sparse. He never married. He lived alone in a small cabin adjacent to the lot. Neighbors described him as quiet, hard-working, and unfailingly polite. The tree lot was a modest operation. Hartley would travel into the national forest each fall, cutting Douglas fir and ponderosa pine under permit from the Forest Service, then trucking the trees back to his lot for sale. He operated only during December, opening on the first of the month and closing on Christmas Eve. His prices were fair, his trees were well tended. For over a decade, buying a tree from Emmett Hartley was simply part of Christmas in Young. On December 24, 1958, Hartley opened the lot as usual. According to witnesses who spoke to sheriff's deputies in the days that followed, at least 4 families purchased trees that afternoon. The last confirmed customer was a rancher named Wallace Dunlap, who bought a 6-foot Douglas fir at approximately 4:30 in the evening. Dunlap later stated that Hartley had seemed normal, wished me a Merry Christmas, same as always. Hartley was never seen again. When the lot failed to open on December 26th, Hartley typically spent the day after Christmas clearing unsold inventory. A neighbor walked over to check on him. The cabin was empty. Hartley's truck was parked in its usual spot. His wallet, keys, and personal effects were found inside the cabin. A half-eaten dinner sat on the kitchen table. The search lasted 2 weeks. Deputies, volunteers, and Forest Service rangers combed the surrounding wilderness. No trace of Emmett Hartley was ever found. No body, no clothing, no sign of where he might have gone or what might have happened to him. The lot was never reopened. The property passed through several owners over the following decades, but was never developed. By the 1980s, the fence had collapsed, the cabin had rotted, and the lot had become an overgrown tangle of weeds and volunteer pines. But every December, something happens there. The first reports of unusual activity at the old Hartley lot date to the early 1970s. A woman named Opal Fredrickson, who lived on a ranch approximately half a mile from the property, told neighbors she had seen lights through the trees on the night of December 22, 1973. She assumed teenagers were trespassing and asked her husband to investigate the following morning. He found nothing, no trash, no tire tracks, no sign anyone had been there. Similar reports accumulated over the following decades. Residents near the lot described hearing chainsaws running after dark during the week before Christmas, the distinctive sound of a 2-stroke engine, the whine of a blade cutting through wood. When investigated, the lot was always empty. Longtime resident George Benavidez, interviewed by a regional magazine in 2002, described his own experience. I drove past the lot on December 23rd, maybe 1987 or 88. It was around 7 in the evening, just getting dark. I saw lights, not flashlights, but work lights, like you'd string up to illuminate a job site. I could see trees standing in rows the way Hartley used to arrange them. I slowed down and the lights went out. When I stopped to look, there was nothing there, just the old fence posts and the weeds. Multiple witnesses have reported finding physical evidence of activity at the lot. Fresh tire tracks appear in the mud near the entrance between December 20th and December 25th, even when no vehicles have been observed entering or leaving. Cut pine boughs, fresh with sap still sticky, are found scattered on the ground, though no one has ever witnessed anyone cutting them. A mail carrier named Darlene Vickers reported an encounter in December 2007. I was delivering to the house closest to the lot, she said. As I was walking back to my truck, I smelled fresh-cut pine. Strong, like someone had just taken a saw to a tree. I looked toward the lot and saw a man standing there, maybe 50 yards away. He was holding a saw. He waved at me. I waved back without thinking. When I looked again, he was gone. Vickers described the man as wearing work clothes and a wool cap, consistent with photographs of Emmett Hartley from the 1950s. On Christmas Day 2014, Gila County Deputy Rosario Estrada responded to a complaint from a property owner adjacent to the Hartley lot who had reported hearing chainsaw noise the previous night. Estrada arrived at approximately 10 in the morning and walked the property to investigate. Near what had once been the lot entrance, she found a piece of paper lying on the frozen ground. The document was a handwritten receipt on yellowed paper dated December 24, 1958. It recorded the sale of one Douglas fir, 7 feet tall, for $3.50. The customer name written on the receipt was Loretta Winslow. Estrada photographed the receipt and collected it as evidence. A record search revealed that Loretta Winslow had been a lifelong resident of Payson, Arizona. She had died on December 17, 2014, 1 week before the receipt was found. Further research confirmed that Winslow had family connections to Young. Her grandmother had lived in Pleasant Valley in the early 20th century. But there was no record of Loretta Winslow ever purchasing a tree from Emmett Hartley, and she would have been only 11 years old in 1958. Deputy Estrada's report noted the discrepancy but offered no explanation. The receipt was logged into evidence at the Gila County Sheriff's Office, where it remains. The handwriting on the receipt matched samples of Emmett Hartley's script, obtained from Forest Service permit applications. The paper stock was consistent with materials available in the 1950s. The ink showed aging patterns appropriate to a document over 50 years old. But the receipt had not been there when Estrada arrived. Other officers had walked the same ground minutes earlier and found nothing. The Hartley tree lot remains abandoned. The property has changed hands twice since 2014, but no development has occurred. The current owner, a Phoenix-based investment group, has shown no interest in the land. Residents of Young continue to report lights, sounds, and the smell of fresh-cut pine during the week before Christmas. The tire tracks continue to appear, the pine boughs continue to be found, and every few years someone finds something else. A scrap of paper, a faded price tag, a length of twine that looks freshly cut. Emmett Hartley vanished on Christmas Eve, 1958. No one knows where he went or what happened to him. His body was never recovered. His story was never finished. Perhaps for him, it still isn't. The lot closed 67 years ago. The fence posts have rotted. The cabin is gone. But somewhere in that overgrown tangle of weeds and memory, someone is still working. The lights come on after dark. The chainsaw winds through the cold December air. And if you drive past slowly enough, you might see trees standing in rows the way they used to, waiting for customers who haven't arrived yet. Or perhaps waiting for one customer in particular, the one whose receipt was written before she died, for a tree she never came to collect. The prayers rise from a church that exists only in stone and memory. Cherry Creek lies in a narrow canyon in the southern reaches of the Tonto National Forest, approximately 40 miles northeast of Globe. The settlement was established in 1876 after prospectors discovered silver deposits in the surrounding hills. Within 5 years, Cherry Creek had grown to nearly 800 residents, miners, merchants, families seeking fortune in the Arizona Territory. The town boasted 2 saloons, a general store, a small schoolhouse, and a Catholic mission church built of native stone and timber. By 1890, the silver was running out. Families began leaving for richer prospects elsewhere. The population dwindled to fewer than 200. When fire swept through the settlement on the night of March 15, 1892, destroying the mission church and several adjacent buildings, most residents took it as a sign. Within 3 years, Cherry Creek was abandoned entirely. The canyon has remained largely empty ever since. The Forest Service maintains a rough access road for fire management purposes, but there are no services, no facilities, no reason for casual visitors to make the journey. The ruins of the settlement are scattered across a quarter-mile of rocky terrain, collapsed walls, rusted machinery, the occasional foundation stone emerging from the scrub. Most structures have been completely reclaimed by the desert. The foundation of St. Helena's Mission is the most substantial remnant. The stone walls rise perhaps 3 feet at their highest point, forming a rectangular outline approximately 40 feet by 20 feet. The timber frame, roof, and everything else burned in 1892. The altar stone remains in position at the eastern end, blackened by fire, but intact. It is here, according to more than a century of witnesses, that the Christmas Eve Mass is still held. The first documented report dates to December 1923. A prospector named Thomas Milligan was traveling through the canyon on his way to a claim near the Sierra Ancha when he stopped to camp near the Cherry Creek ruins. In a letter to his sister preserved in the Arizona Historical Society archives, Milligan described being awakened shortly before midnight by the sound of many voices speaking in unison, as if in prayer. Milligan approached the old church foundation and observed what he described as candlelight flickering within the walls, as if the building still stood and a service was being conducted inside. He could see no figures, no movement, only the light and the sound of voices. The prayers continued for approximately 15 minutes before falling silent. The light faded. Milligan wrote that he left the canyon at first light and never returned. Similar accounts have accumulated over the following century. Hunters, hikers, Forest Service personnel, and curiosity seekers have all reported the same phenomenon, candlelight visible within the church foundation on Christmas Eve, typically beginning around 11:30 and continuing until midnight, accompanied by the sound of voices reciting what appears to be a liturgical service. The voices are the most consistent element of the reports. Witnesses describe them as dozens of people speaking together, not singing, but reciting, in the rhythmic cadence of responsive prayer. The language has never been definitively identified. In 1987, a linguistics professor from the University of Arizona named Dr. Ernesto Villarreal made the journey to Cherry Creek specifically to investigate the reports. He brought recording equipment and stationed himself near the church foundation from 10 in the evening until 1 in the morning on Christmas Eve. His recordings captured nothing audible, only wind and ambient canyon noise. But Villarreal heard the prayers himself. Dr. Villarreal documented his experience in a paper submitted to the Journal of American Folklore in 1989, though it was rejected for publication due to what editors termed insufficient evidentiary support. His personal notes, shared with colleagues before his death in 2011, provide the most detailed analysis of the Cherry Creek prayers available. The language was unmistakably Latin, Villarreal wrote. I recognized the structure of the Mass, the Kyrie, the Gloria, portions of the Eucharistic prayer, but the pronunciation was unlike any Latin I have ever heard. The vowel sounds were flattened in ways that suggest a speaker whose native tongue was not derived from Romance languages. The accent patterns were irregular, almost musical. Villarreal speculated that the prayers might represent a form of Latin spoken by early Spanish missionaries who had extensive contact with indigenous populations, a hybrid pronunciation that developed in isolation and was never recorded. However, he acknowledged a significant problem with this theory. There is no historical evidence that Spanish missionaries ever established a presence in the Cherry Creek area. St. Helena's Mission was built by American settlers in 1878, nearly 3 centuries after the Spanish colonial period. Whatever I heard, Villarreal concluded, it was older than the church. It was older than the settlement. It may be older than anything we have records for. Other witnesses have offered their own interpretations. A retired school teacher named Constance Ashworth, who visited Cherry Creek in December 2001, described the experience in an interview with a Phoenix newspaper. I don't speak Latin. I wouldn't know Latin if I heard it. But I knew somehow that what I was hearing was a prayer. It felt like a prayer. The rhythm of it, the pauses, like people asking for something or thanking something. It was the most peaceful sound I've ever heard, and it was the most unsettling. A Tonto Apache cultural consultant named Raymond Dosella, asked about the Cherry Creek phenomenon in 2015, offered a measured response. The canyon has been there longer than any of us. Things have happened in that place that were never written down. What your people call a church service might be something much older wearing familiar clothing. The land remembers. It speaks in whatever language the listener can understand. The Forest Service has no official position on the Cherry Creek reports. Internal memoranda from 1994, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, reference seasonal acoustic phenomena at the Cherry Creek Historic Site and recommend continued monitoring but no active investigation. No formal study has ever been conducted. Attempts to document the phenomenon have consistently failed. Audio recordings capture nothing unusual. Video equipment deployed at the site in 2008 by a documentary film crew showed only darkness, no candlelight, no movement, nothing to corroborate what the crew members themselves reported seeing and hearing. The producer, an independent filmmaker named Rachel Woodbury, eventually abandoned the project after 3 consecutive Christmas Eve visits yielded footage that contradicted her own sensory experience. "I saw the light," Woodbury said in a 2012 interview. "I heard the voices. My cameras showed an empty ruin. Either my equipment was malfunctioning, or whatever happens there doesn't want to be recorded. After 3 years, I decided not to push my luck." Historical research has uncovered no explanation for the 1923 starting date. The church burned in 1892. The settlement was abandoned by 1895. For nearly 3 decades, there were no reported sightings of anything unusual at the site. Then, Thomas Milligan heard prayers in the darkness, and the reports have continued every year since. Some researchers have noted that 1923 was the year that the last known survivor of Cherry Creek died, an elderly woman named Marguerite Sorel, who had lived in the settlement as a child and attended services at St. Helena's Mission before the fire. She passed away in a nursing home in Tucson on December 18, 1923, 6 days before Milligan's encounter. Whether this connection is meaningful or coincidental has never been determined. Cherry Creek remains abandoned. The access road is rough but passable in dry weather. The ruins offer little to see: crumbling stone, rusted metal, the slow erasure of human presence by desert and time. But every Christmas Eve, as midnight approaches, something stirs in the old church foundation. The candles appear first, points of warm light where no candles exist, flickering within walls that are no longer there. Then come the voices, rising from the stone, speaking words that were ancient before the mission was built, before the prospectors arrived, before anyone thought to name this place or claim it. The congregation gathers where it has always gathered. The prayers continue as they have always continued. And for 15 minutes, on the longest night of the year, St. Helena's Mission stands again, not in timber and glass, but in something older and less easily destroyed. The fire took the building. It did not take the faith. And in Cherry Creek, in the candlelit darkness of a church that burned over a century ago, the midnight mass is still being said. The language is Latin. The accent belongs to no one who ever lived, and the prayers, whatever they ask for, have not yet been answered. "43 letters, 43 years, and everyone asking to be found." Workman Creek flows from the high country of the Sierra Ancha, descending through a series of cascades and pools before joining the Salt River drainage near the eastern edge of the Tonto National Forest. The creek is named for an early settler whose homestead once occupied a clearing near the Upper Falls, a man who came to Arizona in the 1880s and whose descendants still ranch in the Tonto Basin. The surrounding wilderness is steep. densely forested, and largely inaccessible except by foot trails that become treacherous in winter. Workman Creek Falls drops approximately 100 feet in two stages, the upper falls plunging into a pool that feeds the lower cascade. In summer, the falls draw occasional visitors willing to make the 8-mile round-trip hike from the nearest trailhead. In winter, the creek often freezes, creating elaborate ice formations that coat the rock walls and transform the cascade into a cathedral of frozen water. Few people make the journey during the cold months. The trails are icy, the daylight is short, and the isolation is absolute. The Sierra Ancha has a history of swallowing those who enter unprepared. Between 1947 and 2016, 23 people were reported missing in the wilderness area. 14 were found alive. 4 were recovered deceased. 5 were never located. Their files remain open, their fates unknown. Workman Creek has figured in 3 of those disappearances. In each case, the missing person was last seen hiking toward the falls during winter months. In each case, search efforts found no trace. The terrain is simply too vast, too rugged, too willing to keep its secrets, or so investigators believed until December 2016. The container was discovered on December 18, 2016, by a 31-year-old hydrologist named Corinne Pemberton. She was conducting a winter flow assessment of Workman Creek as part of a long-term study of Sierra Ancha watersheds. The work required her to access the base of the upper falls, where she planned to install temperature sensors in the pool beneath the cascade. The falls were partially frozen, with water still flowing behind a curtain of ice perhaps 3 feet thick. As Pemberton positioned her equipment, she noticed a glint of metal wedged into a crevice behind the ice sheet, an area that would be completely submerged and invisible during normal flow conditions. The drought conditions of recent years had reduced the creek to a fraction of its typical volume, exposing features that had been underwater for decades. Pemberton retrieved the object with difficulty, chipping away ice to free it from the rock. It was a cylindrical metal container, approximately 12 inches long and 4 inches in diameter, sealed with a screw-top lid. The exterior was corroded but intact. A faded label on the side read, U.S. Army, Waterproof Document Case. Inside, Pemberton found 43 pieces of paper, each one folded into quarters. The paper varied in age and condition, some yellowed and brittle, others relatively fresh. Each piece bore handwritten text in pencil. Each was a letter to Santa Claus. The letters followed an identical format. Each began with Dear Santa and was dated December 25th of a specific year. Each contained a single request, written in the same careful handwriting. Please let them find me before spring. Each was signed with initials only, J.W. Pemberton delivered the container to the Gila County Sheriff's Office on December 19th. Detective Angela Ruiz was assigned to examine the contents. Her initial assessment, documented in a report filed on December 22nd, noted several disturbing details. The dates on the letters spanned from 1949 to 2015, 67 years, with 43 letters representing 43 separate years. The missing years showed no discernible pattern. The handwriting, according to a forensic document examiner consulted on December 21st, was consistent across all samples, showing natural aging and variation, but clearly produced by the same individual. The paper types varied considerably. Early letters were written on lined notebook paper consistent with 1940s and 50s manufacturing. Later letters used unlined paper, graph paper, and in one case what appeared to be the back of a topographic map. The pencils used also varied. Some samples showed soft graphite, typical of standard writing pencils. Others showed harder leads used in drafting or technical work. Detective Ruiz cross-referenced the initials J.W. with missing persons cases in the Sierra Ancha dating back to the 1940s. She found no exact match. The closest candidate was a hiker named Jerome Wellman, who disappeared near Workman Creek in November 1948, 1 year before the earliest letter. His body was never recovered. Wellman had been 34 years old at the time of his disappearance, an amateur naturalist from Tempe who frequently explored the Sierra Ancha alone. His last known location was approximately 2 miles downstream from Workman Creek Falls. Search parties spent 3 weeks combing the canyon without success. The case file contained a sample of Wellman's handwriting, a postcard he had sent to his sister from Globe shortly before his disappearance. Forensic comparison with the letters was inconclusive. The examiner noted significant similarities in letter formation, but could not make a definitive match due to the limited sample size. On Christmas morning, 2016, a letter arrived at the Gila County Sheriff's Office in Payson. It had been postmarked from Young, Arizona on December 24th, 6 days after the container was discovered and 3 days after news of its contents had been shared with local media. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper. The format was identical to the others. Dear Santa, December 25th, 2016. Please let them find me before spring. J.W. The handwriting matched the samples from the container exactly. Detective Ruiz traced the postmark to the Young post office, where clerk Nadine Hotchkiss confirmed she had processed the letter on December 24th. She remembered it only because of the unusual address, the sheriff's office rather than a residence. She had not noticed who deposited it. The outgoing mail slot was accessible to anyone during business hours. A search of the Young area produced no leads. Canvassing of local residents yielded no information about anyone matching the initials J.W. or anyone who might have sent such a letter. The forensic timeline presented an impossible contradiction. If Jerome Wellman had written the letters, he would have been over 100 years old by 2016. If someone else was writing them, they had access to samples of Wellman's handwriting and had been maintaining the correspondence for nearly 70 years. Through the container hidden behind the falls, and now through the postal system. Neither explanation was satisfactory. The investigation stalled in early 2017. The container and its contents were cataloged and stored as evidence in an open case file. No further letters arrived at the sheriff's office in the years that followed. However, hikers visiting Workman Creek Falls have reported finding additional letters at the site. In December 2018, a backpacker named Marcus Finley discovered a folded piece of paper wedged into a crack in the rock wall near the pool beneath the falls. The paper was damp but legible. Dear Santa, December 25, 2018. Please let them find me before spring. J.W. Finley reported the find to rangers, who collected the letter but conducted no formal investigation. Similar discoveries have been reported in 2019 and 2021. In each case, the letters were dated the same year they were found. The current whereabouts of the container are unknown. It was last logged in the evidence storage facility in Payson in March 2017. A 2022 audit found the container missing from its designated location. No explanation has been provided. A retired Forest Service ranger named Dwight Halverson, who participated in the original search for Jerome Wellman in 1948, was interviewed by a local historian in 2010, 6 years before the container was discovered. He recalled the search in detail and mentioned a fact that had troubled him for decades. We found his camp, Halverson said. Tent, supplies, everything in order. His journal was there, open to the last entry. He'd written that he was going to hike up to the falls to see the ice formations. It was dated November 28, 1948. Halverson paused. The strange thing was, there was a sealed envelope on top of the journal, addressed to Santa Claus. We figured it was some kind of joke, a grown man writing to Santa. We didn't open it, just left it there with his other effects when we packed up the camp. The envelope was never logged in the official evidence. Its current location, if it still exists, is unknown. Workman Creek Falls continues to freeze each winter, sealing whatever lies behind its curtain of ice. The letters continue to appear year after year, written in handwriting that has not changed since 1949. Whoever J.W. is or was, they are still waiting, still writing, still asking for the same thing they asked for 70 years ago. Please let them find me before spring. Spring comes and goes. The ice melts. The falls thunder back to life. And somewhere in the Sierra Ancha, someone remains unfound. The search was called off in December 1948, but the letters suggest it should never have ended, because whoever is writing them has not stopped waiting, and they have not stopped hoping that someday someone will finally answer. It came down like something being placed, not something falling. Tonto Basin spreads across the high desert of central Arizona, a broad valley cradled between the Mazatzal Mountains to the west and the Sierra Ancha to the east. The basin floor sits at approximately 2,400 feet, while the surrounding peaks rise to nearly 8,000. Roosevelt Lake dominates the southern end of the valley, its waters backed up behind Theodore Roosevelt Dam since 1911. The community scattered across the basin, Punkin Center, Jake's Corner, Tonto Village, have never exceeded a few thousand residents combined. It is a landscape of ranches, retirement homes, and people who came seeking quiet. The Tonto Basin has been inhabited for millennia. The Salado people built cliff dwellings in the surrounding canyons 800 years ago, structures that still stand in protected alcoves throughout the region. The Apache traveled these valleys for centuries before European contact. Spanish explorers passed through in the 1600s, but established nothing permanent. The land resisted settlement until ranchers arrived in the 1880s, drawn by grassland and water. The basin has always occupied a peculiar position in Arizona geography, isolated but accessible, wild but inhabited, modern but somehow outside of time. The Mogollon Rim looms to the north like a wall between worlds. Below the rim, in the valley's shadowed corners, things happen that residents learn not to discuss with outsiders. Christmas 1977 was clear and cold across the basin. Temperatures dropped into the 20s after sunset. The sky was moonless, the stars sharp and bright. It was the kind of night when sound carries for miles and light can be seen from one end of the valley to the other. At approximately 11:15 in the evening, the light appeared. The first report came from a rancher named Hector Dominguez, whose property bordered the national forest north of Roosevelt Lake. Dominguez was outside checking on livestock when he noticed what he initially took for an aircraft landing light approaching from the northeast. He watched it for several seconds before realizing it was moving too slowly and too silently to be any airplane he knew. The light descended at an angle of approximately 30 degrees, tracking northwest to southeast across the basin. Dominguez estimated its altitude at perhaps 2,000 feet when he first saw it, dropping steadily toward the tree line. The descent took between 3 and 4 minutes, far too long for a meteor or falling debris. The light did not flicker, did not pulse, did not change intensity. It simply drifted downward until it disappeared behind the ridge north of his property. There was no sound, no impact, no flash when it reached the ground. Dominguez reported the sighting to the Gila County Sheriff's Office the following morning. By then, he had learned that dozens of other basin residents had seen the same thing. Phone records from the Tonto Basin telephone exchange, preserved in county archives, show that at least 47 calls were placed between 11:15 and midnight on December 25, 1977. Many were between neighbors confirming what they had witnessed. Several were to the sheriff's office, which logged 8 formal reports before deputies were dispatched. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. A bright white light perfectly steady, descending slowly from the northeast and disappearing behind the forested ridges north of the lake. No noise, no explosion, no fire. Deputies searched the area by vehicle the following day but found nothing unusual. A Forest Service helicopter conducted an aerial survey on December 27th. The pilot reported no evidence of impact, crash, or fire anywhere in the search grid. The incident was logged as an unidentified aerial phenomenon and filed without further action. The first scorch mark was discovered on December 26, 1978, exactly 1 year after the light was seen. A deer hunter named Wallace Trujillo was tracking a buck through a drainage approximately 3 miles north of Roosevelt Lake when he entered a small clearing and stopped. The ground before him was marked with a perfect 5-pointed star. Each arm, approximately 15 feet long, burned black into the earth. Trujillo photographed the mark with an Instamatic camera and reported it to the Payson Ranger District. Ranger Donna Schaefer investigated the site on December 28th and confirmed the presence of the scorched pattern. Her report, included in the district's year-end summary, noted several anomalies. The burn was precise, clean edges, uniform depth, no charring beyond the exact lines of the star. The surrounding vegetation showed no fire damage whatsoever. Pine needles and dry grass within inches of the scorched earth were untouched. Schaefer wrote that the mark appeared to have been drawn rather than burned, though she could not explain how such an effect might be achieved. Soil samples collected from the site showed elevated carbon content, but no accelerants, no chemical residue, no evidence of conventional combustion. The pattern did not match any natural phenomenon in Schaefer's experience. A retired metallurgist named Dr. Edwin Brandt, who had settled in the basin after a career with a mining company, examined the site independently in January 1979. He described the burn pattern as thermally precise, consistent with extremely high temperatures applied for a very brief duration. He could offer no explanation for how such conditions might occur in an open forest clearing. The mark faded over the following months, but remained visible through the summer. On December 26, 1979, Ranger Schaefer returned to the site. A fresh 5-pointed star, identical in size and orientation to the first, had been burned into the same location. The pattern repeated in 1980, same date, same clearing, same perfect star. By then, the site had attracted attention beyond the basin. A journalist from the Arizona Republic visited in January 1981 and wrote a brief article about the Christmas star of Tonto Basin. The piece ran in the paper's weekend edition and generated a modest amount of curiosity. The Forest Service responded by restricting access to the area. A temporary closure order was issued for the drainage containing the clearing, citing resource protection concerns. Rangers were instructed not to discuss the site with members of the public. Schaefer, who had documented all 3 marks, was transferred to the Coronado National Forest in southern Arizona in February 1981. Her replacement, a younger ranger named Keith Oxendine, was not briefed on the Christmas star phenomenon. When he discovered references to it in district files, his supervisor told him the matter was closed. On December 26, 1981, the 4th anniversary, Oxendine hiked to the site against instructions. What he found was different. The star was gone. In its place was a hole. The depression was circular, approximately 6 feet in diameter, with edges that sloped downward at a steep angle. Oxendine approached carefully and shone his flashlight into the opening. The beam disappeared into darkness. He could not see the bottom. He dropped a stone into the hole and listened. He heard nothing. Oxendine reported the discovery to his supervisor, who visited the site the following day. An official measurement of the hole's depth was attempted using a weighted line. The line was 150 feet long. It did not reach the bottom. The Forest Service sealed the site in January 1982. A metal grate was installed over the hole, and the closure order was made permanent. No explanation was provided to the public. Chittoor. The hole remains in the forest north of Roosevelt Lake. The grate is still in place, though it has been damaged by weather and time. Hikers who have found the site, the closure is not enforced, merely posted, report that the depression appears unchanged since 1981. No one has ever measured its depth. A 2003 proposal by a geology professor at Arizona State University to conduct a formal survey was declined by the Forest Service without explanation. The professor, Dr. Yolanda Grijalva, submitted a Freedom of Information request for records related to the site. She received 14 pages, 11 of which were fully redacted. The 3 readable pages contained only Ranger Schaefer's original reports from 1978 and 1979. Longtime residents of Tonto Basin rarely discuss the Christmas star or the hole that replaced it. Those who were present in 1977 remember the light clearly, but have learned that speaking of it invites questions they cannot answer. A rancher named Edgar Whitehorse, whose family has worked land in the basin for 4 generations, was asked about the incident in a 2015 oral history project. He paused for a long time before responding. "Something came down that night," he said finally. "We all saw it. It came down slow, like it knew exactly where it was going, and for 3 years it left its mark. Then it stopped leaving marks and left a door instead." He was asked what he meant by door. Whitehorse shook his head. "I don't go near that clearing," he said. "Nobody does. Some holes aren't meant to be measured. Some questions aren't meant to be answered." The star fell on Tonto Basin 48 years ago. The light has never returned. The marks have never reappeared, but the hole remains, open, unmeasured, waiting. And every Christmas night, a few basin residents still look toward the ridge where the light descended, wondering if this will be the year it comes back, or wondering if it ever really left.